Chapter 100, Stopped. Chapter 100, Stopped. Yi Mo had prepared everything and gave the task of caring for the silver heartgrass to Yu Erhu. He was prepared to go to the Taklamakan desert. If he were successful this time and found large amounts of purple heartvine, then he would be able to reach the third stage of Kai gathering, and as soon as he did, he would find Chen Longtu. Forcing him to hide to survive, Chen Longtu had been marked by Yi Mo. He was a cultivator. If he could let it go, he wouldn't be Yi Mo. It was because of this that he desperately wanted to go to the desert and find the purple heart vine. Just when Yi Mo was about to leave, Lu Xiaozhen rushed in, her face full of worry. Lu Xiaozhen was the new nurse Yi Mo recruited. She had graduated from a nursing school and often liked to play with Yu Erhu, calling him brother under the same master. What? Yi Mo looked at the anxious Lu Xiaozhen and asked. Just then, Brother Yu took in a patient but just diagnosed through feeling pulse and gave him a small cup of heart-appeasing serum. Then, that man fell unconscious and started frothing, Lu Xiaozhen said in one breath, and was still puffing for breath. However, the worry on her face didn't lessen, because if a small clinic caused the death of a patient, it would be different to a big hospital. The big hospital could deny, but the small clinic had to be fully responsible. Yi Mo put down the bag he had packed and hurried over to the clinic. He had already told Yu Erhu not to take the troublesome patients. If they couldn't cure it, it would affect their reputation, but if they did manage to heal it, it would attract too much attention and wouldn't be good for Yi Mo either. The clinic had opened for more than 20 days, and this was the first time this situation had arisen. Before arriving, Yi Mo had already scanned with his spirit sense, since the clinic was just in front of where Yi Mo lived. When he came to the clinic, he saw Yu Erhu sweating, trying to save the man on the bed, and was obviously very worried. On the bed laid a man in his 40s, who still had froth coming out of his mouth, but his eyes were closed. Obviously, his condition wasn't light and should be out cold. Beside the man stood a teenage girl who looked like a high school student and another woman accompanied by a young man. Other than these three, two others people in the clinic seemed to be patients here, while 3 people were enjoying the show at the door. Erhu, come down first. Yi Mo, with only one glance, knew that Yu Erhu's method would not be able to save and wake up the man. Master, you're here. Hearing Yi Mo's voice, he had finally calmed down. In his eyes, his master was capable of everything. Yi Mo had already seen that the man being unconscious had nothing to do with the heart-appeasing serum. It was due to other reasons. So Yi Mo didn't go there to treat him. He wanted to see first what the families would say. If they tried to blame it on him, then he wouldn't be nice anymore. Seeing Yi Mo look over, the middle-aged woman rubbed her eyes and said, Doctor, my husband has always had this disease, so I don't blame you. I just heard that many people say that you could cure some incurable diseases, so I came to try my luck. However, I didn't expect my husband to have an outbreak again. Sorry, I'll call the ambulance right away. Yi Mo sighed. This woman had a good character and didn't try to blame him like some other people would, which gave Yi Mo a good impression of her. Her husband fainted in this clinic, and yet she was still the one to apologize to the doctor there. Yi Mo remembered when he was in Ninghai, he had read in the newspaper that an old lady fell down, and someone tried to help her up, but she actually blamed that person for knocking her over and even wanted him to pay her compensation. Compared to that, this woman's characters was infinitely better, and Yi Mo decided to save her husband just because of the woman's character. Thinking about this, Yi Mo waved his hand and smiled. Don't call them. It's useless to go to the hospital unless you want them to do an open brain surgery on your husband. However, that would still be detrimental. Coincidentally, I have a way to cure this disease, so I'll look at it for him now. Ah. This woman was shocked on the scene upon hearing that Yi Mo could cure her husband. Although her husband's disease wasn't incurable, it was very hard to cure. This was the conclusion they drew from seeing so many doctors. They came to this clinic because they had heard that as long as they took you in, you would be treated. Originally, they came to try their luck and, of course, Yu Erhu rejected to do any treatment. However, he was too kind-hearted. Seeing that this man was in pain, he gave him to drink a cup of heart-appeasing serum, but he didn't expect a problem to arise out of that. Yu Erhu wanted to help this man, so Lu Xiaozhen hurried to get Yi Mo. Although this woman knew her husband's problem, she hadn't called an ambulance because she had thought that Yu Erhu would be able to save him. However, She hadn't expected Yu Erhu to be unable to save her husband, even when his master came out. Thus, she decided to call the ambulance. Nevertheless, she would have never expected this younger-looking man to say that he could cure her husband and was immediately stunned. By the time she had reacted, Yi Mo was already saving her husband. Yi Mo knew this man's disease with a scan of his spirit sense. His disease should be called a hereditary hemorrhagic telangiectasia, 1, which was a small pink-red spot in the blood vessels of his brain. Even open-head surgery wouldn't be able to fully remove it and might instead cause more severe consequences. Thus, Yi Mo said that hospitals currently wouldn't be able to treat such disease. However, this disease only tortured people. They would feel headaches all seasons of the year, and the more time passed, the higher frequency it had. Although this disease wouldn't cause people to die immediately, it would be very hard to live over 50 years. An illness that was hard to treat for a hospital was very easy for Yi Mo. He only needed to pass his spirit Kai into the brain through the needle and remove the red dots. This was even easier than curing the purple coral poison of that old man. After all, he was currently in the late phase of the second stage of Kai gathering already. It had only been half an hour, but Yi Mo was already done. When he was finishing up, the man actually sat up. Everyone was stunned as they looked at Yi Mo and wondered how there could be such magical doctor. He had only needed half an hour to make a person who looked like he was about to die, lively again. The man sat up and was in shock, but soon, he reacted and touched his pain-free head with joy. That joy was so intense that he was ready to call Yi Mo Dad. A few decades of headaches suddenly disappeared. Anyone would be delighted. Miracle doctor. This man said and was about to kneel down and bow his head. However, Yi Mo stopped him. I just happen to know how to cure this disease. If it had been some other illness, I wouldn't have a way. He showed too much of himself healing this man, so he quickly found an excuse. At this moment, both the wife and the 2 children understood that Yi Mo had really cured the man. The woman was so happy that she was going to kneel down with her husband. Nobody knew how much trouble this pain had brought upon their family. Yi Mo looked at this family full of gratitude and felt emotional. He thought that the sooner he killed Chen Longqiu, the sooner he would be able to help people by curing some hard diseases. His simple actions could make a family happy for life. The reason that Yi Mo would be able to stand out in the open after finishing Chen Longqiu was because if he could do so, the Song family wouldn't dare to do anything to him. He had already heard from Wu Xueming that Chen Longqiu definitely had more power than the Song family. They were incomparable, and he believed Wu Xueming's words. If he had the power to kill Chen Longqiu, the Song family would be wise if they didn't look for trouble. However, Yi Mo thought that if he could live without hiding, he wouldn't have the time to practice medicine either, so it seemed that he should teach his skills to Yu Erhu. When Yu Erhu learned everything, he would be able to cure people instead of him. Although Yi Mo didn't want to take too much money, the family still handed over $20,000. Yi Mo wasn't short on money now, and the clinic was going well, so he insisted on only taking $5,000. However, no matter how Yi Mo tried to explain that he just knew how to cure this disease, the clinic was still rising in fame and popularity. Nevertheless, Yi Mo didn't care about this. After briefing Yu Erhu, he left for the desert. After getting off the plane, he found a distant place and recovered his usual appearance. He was about to go into the desert and didn't want to go in as Mo Yi, so he switched back to Yi Mo. After all, if he was suspected of anything there, then he could use the identity of Mo Yi to cover up. Yi Mo wasn't planning on taking the bus into the desert as he didn't want anyone to know what he was doing. Besides, his cloud shadow step was not slower than cars, and actually, it was much faster than cars in the desert. As soon as he had left Kualei, Yi Mo felt that he was being watched. He realized that it was 3 people and, although Yi Mo didn't know why they were monitoring him, this was at the border of the desert, so he wasn't worried at all. If he went into the desert, it would be very hard for them to find his track. Wait. One of the men rode on a motorbike and stopped Yi Mo. Seeing that Yi Mo had stopped, he asked, "There's a car, why don't you take it? Why are you running?" Then, he waved towards the 2 men behind him. One of them took out 2 photos and, as he looked at Yi Mo, he frowned. Seeing this, Yi Mo immediately knew he was suspected. He just didn't know what picture they were looking at. "So what if I run?" Move aside. Yimo estimated that things would get dirty today. I can't tell about the face, but the figure looks really similar to Shi Ying, and that man is called Yimo, the person looking at the photo said. Take him away first, the man riding the motorbike said. At the same time, he took out a big knife from his bag. Notes. 1. If anyone is interested, it is not only in the brain. https://en. Wikipedia. Org wiki hereditary_hemorrhagic_telangiectasia. Chapter 101. The Battle in the Desert. Chapter 101. The Battle in the Desert. In the east part of Africa near the Somalia, there was an island called Naban where Chen Longto's army was set. This place was close to the Arabian Sea, so they could enter the sea at any time, which was good to store an army. The place that Chen Longtu chose to reside in was not only good-looking but had a surrounding mountain that shielded it from anyone's view. In any case, even if it weren't shielded, no one would be stupid enough to spy on Chen Longto's army. At this moment, Chen Longtu, who was at an extremely grandiose mansion, was roaring. His only son was killed inland, and now, there was still no news of the killer. He had already ordered that if nobody could find the killer's whereabouts, then they should bring him the head of the government authority responsible for that area. However, just when Chen Longtu was getting more and more impatient, a soldier in charge of the communications suddenly ran in and reported, "Godfather, we have news of the killer." Chen Longtu liked people to call him Godfather because he had loved the American movie The Godfather. He often said that he would be better than him. Right now, Chen Longto's greatest worry was that his son's killer wouldn't be found, and now that he heard the killer had been found, no matter how calm he was, he couldn't help but to ask immediately. If it had been anything else, he would sit without moving and wait until the soldier had finished his report, but since it involved his son's killer, he couldn't keep his calm anymore. We don't know the name of the killer right now, but his figure seems very close to Shi Ying. We have already 3 brothers that have been killed by this man, and the way he kills is exactly the same, shooting metal nails into the forehead. It can be seen that this man is the same person as the killer at Ninghai. Our men must have found something special and went to ask but were killed. The soldier reported everything he knew. Chen Longto's face kept changing but didn't say a word. He knew that the soldier should still have something else to report. As expected, the soldier breathed and continued. After he had killed them and was prepared to destroy the evidence, the local police came. However, this person didn't seem to want to act against them, so he stole the motorbike and drove into the Taklamakan desert. Our men have already followed him in. Immediately assemble every member of Nanqing, capture him at all costs even if it means flipping the desert, or just kill him and bring his head back as a sacrifice for Shiping. Chen Longtu interrupted the soldier's words and said immediately. Yimo saw that these 3 people were identifying him through the photo and knew that if he were to let them go, his identity would be exposed. Since they still need to use the pictures, it meant that they weren't 100% sure that Yimo was Shi Ying. It didn't matter if his identity was exposed, but it couldn't be exposed now. Now, he was still in the second stage of Kai gathering, so it was not good for him if his identity was exposed. Once he reached the 3rd stage, he would be able to use many of the magical arts, then, it wouldn't matter. Since he knew that these 3 came to investigate him and were suspecting him, he immediately killed them without mercy. Although he knew they were either from the Song family or Nanqing, Yimo wasn't sure which. However, at the pace the Song family should be investigating him, it shouldn't be them since they wouldn't have such influence, so these people were probably Nanqing's men. Thinking about Nanqing, Yimo was also surprised. As soon as he showed his face, these people came charging over. Luckily he stayed at home and rarely showed his face in Luokang, otherwise, he would probably have been discovered there. Yimo didn't have the slightest remorse in killing these 3, those who wanted his life needed to pay with their own. However, killing people in broad daylight required cleaning up. This wasn't Luoyu continent where no one cared if you killed someone. Just when Yimo was prepared to burn the 3 people, a police vehicle suddenly came over. He deduced that there was a 4th person who had run away and called the police, so now that he had been exposed, Yimo could no longer be bothered with destroying evidence. He rode on the motorbike and escaped into the desert. Although Yimo killed men from Nanqing, he didn't feel the slightest pressure at all. However, he still didn't want to attack the police, and without life-threatening situation, it was too significant to kill them. Yimo still wanted to stay here and didn't want to do such thing unless his life was in danger. Even if he had killed the police and removed the evidence there, he wouldn't have been able to seal the information shut since there was still a fourth person somewhere. Before Yimo came, he went through large amounts of information regarding the desert. He didn't plan to enter at this point, but he had no other choice. He knew that the most dangerous place was the Ku Lake near the outskirts, and many explorers had died here. The difference in temperature between day and night was tremendous, and usually, explorers would never come here alone. When they did, it was with a big team. Yimo also found the names in coral, Luobu, Holy Door, but he wasn't sure if Luobu was the Luobu Lake. The map didn't point to the direction of Luobu Lake either. However, according to the data he had gathered, Taklamakan once buried large amounts of ancient cities, one of which was the famous Lulan city, who had also disappeared here. Many cities along the Silk Road have been buried by the desert in history. Yimo didn't know if the Holy Door he had to find was one of the ancient cities here. Yimo didn't rush into the desert. Although he was a cultivator, his state was very low, and now, not only he didn't have storage equipment, but he had strayed from the original route, so, after he had gone in the desert, he stopped moving forward. Instead, he took out the map and wanted to carefully determine his following route. Many people who came with many vehicles were eventually buried either in Luobu Lake or someplace else in the Taklamakan Desert. Yimo was only by himself now. All the water he had was carried in his bag. He was a far cry from those who had cars filled with water. Yimo originally thought that he had gone deep into the desert now and was very far from the nearest road, so those from Nanqing shouldn't be able to chase him here. However, Yimo once again underestimated the people from Nanqing. He quickly realized that he had been surrounded after only an hour or two since he had set up the tent. These people were really fast and actually chased into the desert. Yimo didn't have time to pack up his tent and just put his bag on and got ready to run. In the desert, there was no place to hide, and these 20 or so people had at least 10 guns. Although they didn't have any strong guns, and most of them were the same model, it was still enough to threaten Yimo. As though knowing Yimo's power, those people didn't hesitate to open fire as soon as Yimo came out. One person even threw a grenade. Obviously, these people's orders were to bring him back dead or alive. In the desert, Yimo didn't have another choice except to kill them all. At the same time he dodged the bullet, the metal nails flew out like flower petals. This wasn't the stone room in Flowing Snake. In this boundless desert, there were almost bullets flying from all directions. Yimo was sure that these people weren't from the Song family. They wouldn't be able to get this firepower. They were definitely from Nanqing. Qian Longtu managed to get more than 20 people in such a short time and more than 10 guns. It could be seen how powerful Nanqing was. If he had been at their base, then what would the scene be like? Yimo was starting to reconsider if he had the power to face Nanqing at their headquarters even after he had reached the third stage. However, he didn't have time to think because another 2 Range Rovers were heading their way. The car's engine could be heard during the battle, and Yimo knew that if he didn't finish this quickly, there would be more and more people. He felt some pain on his lower waist, and Yimo knew he had been shot. After all, his spirit sense range was still too small. He couldn't dodge the hidden shots. However, the person who shot him was killed by his nail at the next moment. When the Range Rovers were getting closer and closer, Yimo had killed everyone who surrounded him before. However, he had also received a gunshot wound, and his tent was full of holes which scared him a little. He didn't want another accident like this to happen. He had used a lot of Kai in this battle. After all, he had to dodge bullets. He didn't think a long time before simply leaving his tent behind and quickly dashed into the depth of the desert. While running in the desert, Yimo realized he had been a bit careless. He hadn't expected Nanqing to be this crazy, sending people into the desert to obstruct him. He couldn't even act according to his plan before taking a bullet. After 2 hours, Yimo was completely lost. Although he knew it was very dangerous to be lost in the desert, this was still much better than tens of people with guns surrounding him. Yimo stopped and treated his wound before realizing that at least 6 of the 20 bottles of spring water he had were pierced by bullets. The direction of the bullet was very weird. It shot through 6 bottles at once. Yimo looked around. It was a boundless desert everywhere and a few occasionally dead tree. He cursed, now, he didn't even have a tent. If only he had a GPS. However, Yimo didn't have the money to buy such a thing at all. Seeing that the sky was getting dark, Yimo looked around, took out a sleeping bag from his bag and barely hung it on the big tree. He needed to rest for the night. He just received a gunshot wound and hadn't completely healed yet. Now, there wasn't much water remaining, so he needed to conserve stamina and heal up. Chapter 102, Tear like Milan, White Hair like Silver Sand. Chapter 102, Tear like Milan, White Hair like Silver Sand. The night in the desert was relatively cool, and the calm breath almost made Yimo forget that he was still in the desert. However, due to the disturbances of unknown bugs, Yimo didn't get a very restful sleep. Despite this, Yimo still felt pretty energetic when he woke up the next day. However, during the day, the searing heat of the sun made Yimo feeling like he was in an oven, making him almost doubt if it was the same place from the previous night. The rolling heat wave attacked Yimo, and this wasn't even in June. The weather was slightly cool, but the desert was so hot. It seemed that the temperature here was almost 45 degrees Celsius. If this was in June, would the temperature reach 100 degrees Celsius? Yimo didn't dare to stay too long, although his wound was pretty much fine. The more he stayed in the desert, the more danger there was. Since he came, he needed to hurry up and go about his business. Although Yimo found the words Luobu on the map, he didn't plan to go there immediately because the road he got on the map didn't point to that place and instead pointed somewhere else. However, after Yimo had run for a day, he saw a vast empty place, surrounded by dunes. The sand rolled everywhere. Yimo had done some research about the Taklamakan Desert and immediately knew this was the Luobu Lake. The temperature at day was near 50 degrees, but Yimo could endure without it affecting him much. After all, he was a cultivator and was more resistant than ordinary people. However, he only had 9 bottles of water left, and he needed to find a water source fast, otherwise, he would become dehydrated. Yimo didn't plan to come to Luobu Lake first, but since he was already there, he didn't mind looking at it. After all, there were the words Luobu on the goatskin map. Although it was his first time coming here, Yimo knew this was perhaps the most mysterious place in the desert, and many unexplainable events had happened here. Yimo had made some research and discovered that countless people had been lost here. However, there was also a legend that everyone knew. Before Luobu Lake disappeared, it was called Immortal Lake. It was said that the wind god, in order to prevent his daughter Milan from being together with the mortal Luobu, gouged his eyes and broke Milan's legs before scattering them to the east and west side of the desert, making them forever apart. The two weren't able to see each other anymore, and the longingness for each other was like a sword which fastened their aging. In one night, the beautiful young girl Milan's hair turned white, and her rolling tears gathered and formed a river which converged to form a sparkling lake. This formed the fable of the Luobu Lake. Later on, it was said that Milan's yearning became a fatal sickness, and the night that she had died, the heavens changed, and the river went dry. The beautiful Luobu Lake had since disappeared, leaving behind this place full of silver sand which was said to be made from the young girl's white hair. This was the tearful story of Milan, her white hair, and the silver sand. Yimo suddenly thought of this story when he was standing at the Luobu Lake. When he read the story before, he didn't have much reaction to it, but now, standing at the place where the story happened, he realized how melancholic this was. Separated by the heavens, reminiscence like the sword. Was this exactly like him and his master? He didn't know Luo Ying's feelings before, but now he did and finally understood what separated by the heavens, and yearning like the sword felt like. When he was by Luo Ying's side every day, he didn't pay attention to it, but after leaving, he found that he had really lost something. Now that he was reborn on Earth, he realized how low his EQ was before. He couldn't even tell Luo Ying's feelings and could only feel he liked staying with her. However, when the danger came, the first thing Luo Ying thought about was to take him away, but when she activated the teleportation rune, he seemed to have felt a warm sensation brush past his neck. Now that Yimo thought about it, he realized what that warmness was. When Luo Ying activated the rune, she must have been discovered, and someone sneaked attacked her. But, in order to take him away, His master blocked this attack with her own body, and that warmness was the blood she had spat out. Imo suddenly felt he hated himself. He only understood it now, but even then, what if he did? Could he see Luo Ying? If Luo Ying was still where she was before, would she think about him? Just like Milan's tear story. Imo sat on a hardened dune and reminisced the bits and pieces of his memory with Luo Ying and felt immersed at the moment. It was unknown how long he was there before Imo sensed danger. He moved out as quickly as he could, but there was nothing around him. It was as though his feeling before was wrong. Imo frowned. His spirit sense clearly felt something was going to attack him, but now he scanned the surrounding 10 meters and found nothing. The day was already dark as it was almost 11 p.m., he had already been standing there for a few hours. Imo decided to rest one night first and try to find a fresh water source nearby. However, due to his feeling before, he was much more alert. During the night, Luo Bu Lake was dead silent but mysterious, yet, Imo was a cultivator, he wouldn't feel much even if he slept at a graveyard, much less a desert. However, he had seen a ghost cultivator before, but he didn't believe there was such thing as ghosts on Earth because if you weren't a cultivator, your soul would dissipate once you died. Meanwhile, most ghost cultivators were cultivators who had high power but didn't want to enter samsara after death, so they used special artifacts to forcefully keep their soul in the cultivation world to cultivate. Although ghost cultivators could still become immortals when they reach the highest stage, almost no one could reach this stage. The silence didn't last long before a faint and distant shrieking sounded, but since Imo knew that there were some animals in the desert, he didn't mind. However, the spirit Kai was even more scarce in the desert, so Imo couldn't cultivate, he could only sit beside a salt pile and rest. As such, he only rested for an hour before that feeling of being ambushed gushed in his heart again. Imo took out a few metal nails and closely followed the thing that wanted to ambush him. Although he couldn't scan it, he felt it. As though feeling Imo's vigilance, the thing that wanted to ambush didn't move but just watched Imo. At this moment, Imo knew that his senses weren't wrong. He really was being watched by something, and this thing was very patient. However, it was outside the range of his spirit sense, and he could only feel it. However, Imo wouldn't lose to anyone comparing patience. He often cultivated for more than a year, so a few hours was barely anything. Another hour passed, and the thing that hid in the darkness seemed to feel that it was being too careful. Who could discover it when it hid in the sand? It no longer hid and jumped up and rapidly aimed for Imo's head. Its speed even reached Mach 1, however, Imo could even dodge normal bullets, not to mention that he had his attention focused on this thing, so how could he let it attack his head? At that instant, he dodged and shot multiple nails out. A shrieking cry resounded, similar to the shriek of a mouse, but amplified many times. He knew that his nails had hit its target, and at this moment, Imo punched toward the dark shadow. However, Imo realized that his killing blow had missed. That dark figure had run away. But how could Imo let this dark figure escape after grasping its trail? He didn't even think before chasing, yet, after chasing for more than 10 minutes, he still couldn't catch the dark figure. Seeing that this dark figure was faster than him, Imo threw out 2 fireballs. PSH, the fireballs hit the sand, blasting sand everywhere, but the black figure had disappeared. Imo just felt his head numb. He didn't believe in ghosts, but this unexplainable thing just happened in front of his eyes. He clearly saw his fireball land on the dark figure and just disappeared. However, he didn't believe that his fireball could turn the dark figure into nothingness. He wasn't that powerful yet. The surrounding was scarily quiet. The thing that screamed disappeared, and everything else was just the same. Imo calmed down. It was too late. Even if he wanted to find something, he had to wait until the next day. When Imo was prepared to come look again the day after, he suddenly realized he had lost his sense of direction. It had only been 10 minutes, but he was completely lost. At this moment, Imo felt the seriousness of the issue. When he chased the dark figure, he didn't think he would be lost at all, so he didn't carry his bag with him. All of his things were in his bag, so if he lost his bag, it would be a failure even if he managed to get out of here because there were some silver heartgrass seed and the purple heart vine in there. Not to mention these things, he wouldn't last long in the desert without water, even as a cultivator. He needed to go back immediately and find his bag. However, Yimo immediately rejected this idea. If he went back at this time, he could perhaps get farther and farther away, and eventually lose his bag forever. Chapter 103, Yellow-Clothed Woman. Chapter 103, Yellow-Clothed Woman. Yimo calmed down his emotions and didn't continue looking for his bag. Instead, he simply sat down where he was. At this moment, he needed to be calm. Any bit of worry might make him take the wrong choice again. Previously, he definitely wouldn't have believed that he would get lost after chasing someone for only 10 minutes. It was said that the Taklamakan Desert was a bewilderment formation. Now it seemed that there really was one. Although he hadn't slept for the night, Yimo was still full in spirit. The only thing he thought about in his heart was his bag. As soon as dawn approached the next day, Yimo returned to where he had hit the black shadow with a fireball the night before and was amazed to see that the 2 marks he had made with the fireball had disappeared. There were no signs of movement on the sand, but the mark last night just seemed to have been washed by the sand again. Yimo didn't want to waste time here. The scorching sun had risen up once again. If he couldn't find his bag quickly, losing things was insignificant, but losing his life wasn't an option. Although he was a cultivator, he was only in the 2nd stage of Kai gathering and wasn't sure how long he could stay under this blazing sun. He couldn't gu-1, or even eat nothing for a week, much less under such harsh conditions. He studied where he was for a long time before calculating a direction according to the sun and darting that way. A little more than 10 minutes later, Yimo stopped. His direction was obviously not right. If it were right, he would have found where he had rested the night before at that point. When Yimo returned back once again, he made the surprising discovery that the place he came back to didn't seem to be the same as before. However, the sand around him looked the same, and he couldn't really tell at all. Although he wouldn't get worried over this, Yimo knew the situation was serious. Before, he didn't have a GPS, but he had a compass and some tools to tell the direction. But now, he didn't have anything at all and was lost. Yimo knew that usually, people who came to the desert would have some positioning tool with exact longitude and latitude, however, he didn't. He had originally thought that with his cultivation powers, this shouldn't matter much, but now, he realized how wrong he was. But even if he had bought a cheap GPS, he wouldn't have kept it on him and would have probably left it in the bag. Now, Yimo felt like he was stuck in a formation. Yimo wasn't completely clueless about formation. He knew some formations, and as long as he had the material, he could set up hundreds of them. However, the place he was lost at didn't seem totally like a formation. Yimo sighed as he thought that if only he had a storage equipment, then he wouldn't have to worry about losing his bag at all. Yimo didn't run back and fro and, in the end, just chose a direction and left. Since he was already lost, there was no point staying here. The following 2 days, Yimo hadn't seen any signs of humans or animals. There were no water sources either. Under such scorching sun in the desert, if a normal person ran around like Yimo, no matter how strong he was, he would have been gone already. Even Yimo started to feel that he couldn't take it anymore, and if he continued like this, perhaps it would only be a few days before he would be devoured by the desert. Living for 3 days and 4 nights without drinking or eating, Yimo felt the Kai in his body withered, and yet, he had no way to cultivate here. The 5th day, Yimo, who had cracked dry lips, seized any intentions of finding a water source. He was unfamiliar with the desert, he wouldn't know what place should have water. If he didn't meet any people or water, he would be in a dangerous situation. But if he didn't keep searching, he would be baked under the sun and wouldn't last much longer as well. He could only dream to be in the 3rd stage right now. Yimo felt helpless, his powers were still too weak. Just as he was thinking, Yimo suddenly noticed the sand under his feet seemed to be flowing slowly. However, that speed was very slow, and if Yimo didn't have spirit sense, he would definitely be unable to tell. Yimo focused again and found that all the sand gradually flowed to a position under his feet. However, there was no sand building up there. What was happening? No build-up of sand. This meant that all the sand had disappeared under the ground. Disappeared under the ground? Yimo was startled. Since it disappeared under the ground, it meant that the ground below him should be empty. Thinking about this, he no longer dared to remain here. He had already used as much power as he could, so if there was a sand whirlpool suddenly, he wouldn't have the means to escape. But just as Yi Mo was thinking about this and wanted to leave, the sand under his foot suddenly started to spin. Yi Mo felt it was hollow under his foot and he was about to sink in. Yi Mo knew clearly that if he was taken away by the sand, he would die with his current state. He didn't want to be taken in by the sand. He stood on the sand and jumped, flying about 5 to 6 meters in the air. But soon, he felt something was wrong. Although he jumped up, the suction under his foot was still there, and he didn't have any landing spot. A few days ago, perhaps he would have been able to dash out of the whirlpool with a burst of power. But now, he could only watch as he slowly went down. Even if he used his Kai to the maximum, he could only at most slow down the speed of descent. The Kai in his body was no longer enough to support him moving around. Yi Mo sighed. He didn't expect that he would die like this in the desert. At this moment, he thought of many things. Luo Ying's smile and voice circulated around him, and also what Ning Qingxue had said that night, "The things I left in the garden are for Yi Mo." He was stunned for the moment. Just when Yi Mo was about to accept the fate of being devoured by the sand, he suddenly felt his waist tighten as a white strand of clothes twisted around his waist. Although he was stunned briefly while being devoured by the sand, he wouldn't let such opportunity pass. He immediately grabbed the strand, and just when he was prepared to pull himself out, he felt his waist tighten, and he was flung up. When he fell on the hard sand ground, the white strand was taken back. Yi Mo was astonished. This person's ability was a level higher than the Hu Qiu he met last time. Who was this person? Standing 10 meters away from Yi Mo was a woman with a pale yellow dress. She had a cloth covering her face and was staring at Yi Mo right now. Her eyes were clear and vibrant, giving people a sense of serenity. It was actually such a woman, and she still wore a dress in the desert. If Yi Mo weren't a cultivator, he would have thought this woman was a goddess. However, Yi Mo obviously wouldn't believe so. Although he couldn't see her face, the temperament and body of this woman were already indescribable. The faint yellow dress stood under the blazing sun without moving at all, as though she was an eternal goddess. However, the backpack behind her also told people that she wasn't a goddess. She was also someone who came to explore the desert. Her hair was a bit messy, but the few black strands that came out made her feel like a goddess even more. Looking at her, Yi Mo seemed to see his master Luo Ying, who was just standing in front of him. He couldn't help but call out, "Master." It was at that instant that he felt he was in love with this woman. This was the first woman that he actually fell in love with other than Luo Ying. Even for Luo Ying, he only realized his dependence later on. This woman looked at Yi Mo's messy look, who didn't have anything with him. Then when she heard Yi Mo mumbling "Master," she couldn't help but frown, but that was it. She didn't say anything. Yi Mo had come to his sense. He already understood that the woman in front of him was no ordinary woman. Otherwise, she wouldn't be coming to the desert dressed like this. He turned around and looked at the whirlpool, but it had already disappeared. He knew this woman had saved his life and also realized his impoliteness, so he quickly saluted with his fists and said, "Thank you, sister, for saving my life." "Sister." The woman seemed to be stunned at the way Yi Mo called her. She saw Yi Mo almost drown in the quicksand and knew his bag was probably devoured by the sand, but she still didn't say anything. She just took out a bag of water and biscuits and threw it to Yi Mo. Yi Mo took the things but didn't open the bag to drink first. Instead, he saluted with his fists once again and said, "Thank you for giving me water. If I, Yi Mo, don't die, I will pay you back." The woman looked at Yi Mo's actions and didn't say anything. However, she felt weirder. She saw that Yi Mo's lips were dry, so obviously, he hadn't drunk water for a long time. Normally, someone who hadn't drunk water for a long time in the desert would dash and drink to their heart's content when they saw water. However, this man, although looking a bit shabby, didn't have any worry of being devoured by the sand. He even seemed calm and talk in a very literate way. Yi Mo saw this woman just look at him but didn't talk. However, he didn't mind. He could tell that this woman didn't live in the city, otherwise, she wouldn't be dressed like this. He had already thanked her, so he opened the bag and drank more than 10 mouthfuls. However, he didn't stick his mouth to the bag and poured it down instead. Did he mind her? She hadn't drunk from the bag, but seeing Yimo's way of drinking, she felt more surprised. He was so thirsty, but he only drank a little more than 10 mouthfuls. This person's self-control and heart were really stable. However, what took her even more by surprise was that Yimo passed the water bag back. This woman frowned. Of course, she wouldn't take back something she gave out, especially after Yimo had drunk from it. Although he didn't touch his mouth with it, she still didn't want it back. Suddenly, this woman wondered if this man had planned to give the bag back to her after drinking, which was why he didn't touch it with his mouth. He was in the desert without water, but he still was able to give this bag of water back to her. Notes: 1. Gu, the state where the cultivator no longer needs to rely on food for energy. Chapter 104, Kulu. Chapter 104, Kulu. The woman hadn't realized that Yimo had scanned her bag with his spirit sense, but other than a few simple girls' items, there were only a few bags of biscuits and these 2 bags of water. The other one only had a bit more than a half. Regardless of who this woman was, Yimo felt respect for her for the fact that she could give more than half of her water to a stranger. He was a cultivator, so with these 10 mouthfuls of water, he should be able to find his bag after asking for directions from this woman. He didn't want to endanger that woman's life because of the water, since no matter how strong she could be, she wasn't a cultivator that could use Kai to recover. Without water, she may be worse off than him. Seeing that this woman looked at him without speaking, Yimo just felt a little confused and wondered if this woman was mute, which would be too unfortunate. How could such a stunning woman be mute? I just lost my bag. Can you tell me how to head to the center of Luobu Lake? Seeing that this woman didn't talk, Yimo could only explain himself. The woman took out a small round disc and looked at it before suddenly pointing a direction. Then, she turned and left. However, she didn't take back the food and water Yimo tried to pass back. From the moment this woman had saved Yimo and gave him directions, she hadn't said one word, so he wasn't sure if she didn't want to talk or couldn't. Seeing the woman disappearing, Yimo felt like he had lost something. He had seen a lot of beautiful women: Ning Qingxue, Kai Wanqing, Su Jingwen, even Yun Bing was very beautiful, but he had never seen someone like this woman who made him lose a part of his soul. Yimo followed the direction she pointed and sprinted over. He didn't expect to find that place in less than half a day. The place that he had looked so hard for a few days was so actually close. Yimo was speechless. However, when Yimo came back to his resting place, he realized that his bag had disappeared. People had come here these few days, and Yimo saw some of their messy footprints and immediately knew his things were taken. He followed the footprints and just walked 100 to 200 meters before finding 2 utility cars behind a dune, and 4 Caucasians were sitting under a tree, eating. His bag was tossed aside, and one of them was looking at Yimo's porcelain bottle which contained his pills inside. Yimo walked over and packed his bag, but the model when Dawn gave to him was missing. Yimo immediately scanned with his spirit sense and found it lying inside one of the cars, covered in a box. It seemed these people also knew that it was worth quite a lot. Seeing Yimo pick the bag up, one of the men immediately came and spoke for a long time. Yimo had learned some simple English in Ninghai University so he could understand, but he couldn't be bothered to respond. These people took his things and asked why he was taking it back. "Who are you? This bag is ours. Why are you taking it?" That man holding the bottle reproached aggressively toward Yimo. He actually spoke fluent Chinese. Yimo immediately grabbed the bottle from his hand and put it back in his bag. He sneered, "Yours? I left it 200 meters over there. How is it yours?" This foreigner was still going to speak, but the person next to him stopped him and spoke in English. "Mac, since this bag is his, let him take it. We don't lose anything." Then, he signaled, and this man called Mac immediately stopped. Yimo knew what they were thinking, but why would he let them do as they wish? When Dawn gave that model to him, although he didn't have any use for it, he didn't want to leave it to a few bad-looking people. Originally, these few people didn't think Yimo had noticed his model was gone, but they saw Yimo walk straight toward one of the cars and opened the case containing the model. He took out the model and the information before dumping it on the ground. How did he know it was in the car? These few foreigners were still thinking when Yimo had already stashed the things inside. The four men reacted and immediately stopped Yimo solving things the hard way. Yimo sneered and used a swirling wind kick and sent the foreigners flying out meters away. Then he looked bleakly at them. If you dare to come again, I won't go easy anymore. The four looked at each other and watched as Yimo just walk out of there. They didn't dare to speak anymore. Although Yimo thought it would be best to kill these four, he thought it would be overreacting for killing these people when they just took a bag in the middle of nowhere. However, when Yimo didn't walk far, he suddenly remembered something and walked back once again. What do you want? We already gave it back to you, the man who could speak Chinese asked worriedly. Yimo ignored him and just took a map of the desert from the car. He didn't have one, so with this, he would be able to find a way back even if he ended up being lost again. He looked at the GPS that seemed to be charging in the car. Yimo pulled it off, but it was immediately out of power. He thought and chucked it back. Then he took another foldable backup tent and 10 bottles of water into his bag. Seeing Yimo just take those few men felt relieved. But then, something that made them worry happened again. Yimo actually took some silver pieces in the car. What took Yimo's attention wasn't their worth, but because it had the Tibetan character door. Could the letter before it be holy? Yimo knew these foreigners came to the Taklamakan to make a fortune. They were looking for these artifacts. The relevant departments wouldn't even care if they took it. Yimo couldn't be bothered with these things, but with that character, Yimo immediately took it seriously. Seeing Yimo just take one piece and left the other things untouched. These few foreigners felt relieved once again. The piece didn't worth much. Where did you find this silver piece? Yimo waved it in front of the foreigners and asked. The foreigners looked at each other but didn't talk. Yimo sneered and spoke once again. If you don't want to speak, fine, but I see there are a lot of good things on your car. I don't mind driving your car away. Oh, by the way, I could make a fire with the remaining car. As soon as Yimo spoke, the man who could speak Chinese immediately said, I know. Hearing these words, Yimo threw the map over and said, show me the location on this map. If there is the slightest difference with mine, I'll make sure you won't leave the desert. It's already marked on the map, the man spoke quickly. Yimo opened the map and indeed saw a place marked with a few English words. Before Yimo asked what it meant, the man explained, we found the silver pieces there because we had found a stone tablet marked with Kulu, so we called that place Kulu. The man didn't seem like he was lying, so Yimo took the map and didn't bother with these few people. He took out his simple map and compared. He made the surprising discovery that this Kulu was the exactly same place marked in his goatskin map. Kulu was probably what he was looking for. Yimo suppressed the joy in his heart, thinking whether this Kulu was the Ku Lake or not. Yimo needed to get there quickly, and the map he took from the foreigners were much more precise than his map. Everything was marked clearly on the map. Seeing Yimo didn't take their car, they finally felt relieved. China's kung fu was too magical. That man just kicked, and they all flew. Yimo believed that these guys were preparing to go back. They didn't have much equipment on their car. Since he had a map and simple navigation equipment, he would be much faster than a car in the desert. After all, there were many places a car couldn't go. Although he had a map and the precise location, Yimo wasn't in a rush. He knew he couldn't be hasty if he wanted to find that place, and he needed to keep his calm. He thought about what happened a few nights before and knew that the black shadow that attacked him was definitely a type of animal in the desert. As for why he would lose his way, he still couldn't understand. But one thing was for sure, he hit his nails. Thinking about the disappearing shadow and fire marks as well as the whirlpool that almost made him lose his life, Yimo connected these things together. He wondered if the place he had sat before was also gradually falling and that caused the marks to disappear. However, thinking that he was sitting at a place where sand fell down, no matter how strong Yimo's heart was, cold sweat slowly fell down his spine. He then thought about the goddess-like woman who saved him. Who was she? In order to conserve his stamina, Yimo didn't run, he chose to walk during the day and rest at night. Ever since he had met the whirlpool that day, Yimo was very cautious. When he rested, he would make sure he found a good place. On the third night after acquiring the map, Yimo stopped at a wall that had been ruined by the sand. He was preparing to rest here for the night before continuing. Chapter 105. The Person Trapped in the Desert. Chapter 105. The Person Trapped in the Desert. At this moment, Kai Wanqing and Ning Qingxue had already entered the desert. However, they didn't come by themselves as originally planned. Instead, there was a whole vehicle crew. Although Kai Wanqing didn't want her father intervening, her father didn't bring up about anything in the past this time and allowed her to enter the desert. Thus, she could only retreat a step. Besides, she knew that her father was doing it for her sake. With her compliance, Kai Yujun not only arranged a few cars for Kai Wanqing but also sent people to go with her in the desert. This was using his authority for private matters, but if it hadn't been for his daughter, Kai Yujun would have never done such thing. However, he had no choice. The daughter he hadn't seen for a few years was going to the desert, and no matter how he had tried to persuade her, she wouldn't agree. He didn't want to have a big fight again, so he could only comply and send people to protect her. Yimo carefully inspected the wall he was sleeping at overnight. Feeling that it was very sturdy, he was assured and opened up the tent. It would be too hot for sleeping bag at night, so he didn't bother pulling that out. At night, Yimo didn't want to sleep. He was cultivating outside the tent, but by midnight, he felt he was being watched again. This feeling made him very uncomfortable and he felt more weird. He wasn't the only person to come to the desert, but why did this only happen to him? Yimo didn't continue waiting this time. He packed his things into the bag and carried his bag. He felt that the thing that was watching him stayed where it was. He wasn't sure if it was the same thing from last night, but since he was being watched, it meant that there was something attracting it from him. As for what it was, he didn't know. Was it still a bear cockroach watching him? Yimo knew this was impossible because it wouldn't be able to survive in the desert. He came to the desert to find the purple heart vine. Did this thing come because of the purple heart vine in his bag? Because other people didn't have it, only he did. If that was the case, this would mean that the thing was sensitive to the purple heart vine. After Yimo put on his bag, he wasn't in a rush to attack this thing. Instead, he took out a metal nail and marked it with his spirit sense before suddenly standing up and walking away from the wall. At the same time, he shot the nail towards the black shadow. Yimo knew he hit his target and immediately chased. This time, he had everything with him, so he wasn't afraid of getting lost. With his food and water as well as his powers, he would be able to survive a month or two in the desert without problems this time. Yimo didn't lose it. He followed closely behind. Although the shadow was on the border of escaping his spirit sense range, he had marked it with a nail. Yimo believed that as long as his spirit sense focused the nail, he would be able to catch that shadow. Although Yimo followed the shadow closely, he felt intrigued about the shadow's stamina. He was sure his nail hit it, but how was it still able to run so fast? The shadow that attacked him a few days ago was like this as well. Just when Yimo was thinking of a way to speed up and catch the shadow, a feeble cough sounded from the distance. The sound was so small that if his hearing wasn't great, he definitely wouldn't be able to hear it. Just phasing for this moment, Yimo lost track of the black shadow. However, Yimo wasn't annoyed. That black shadow must have gone hiding somewhere. The black shadow was shot by the nail. Even if it took the nail out, he worked the nail and would be able to find it with the spirit sense mark. It would be fine at least within a few hours. Now that the thing disappeared, Yimo couldn't be bothered finding it. He just followed where that moan was before. Two men and a woman leaned weakly against a tattered tent. Yimo's spirit sense scanned them before he even went there. The three had messy and dirty hair and looked very shabby. The two men actually carried guns with them. Although that woman didn't have a gun, there was ferocity in her expression. Yimo seemed to have seen this ferocity somewhere. Looking at the position they were sitting, it was obvious these three weren't in the same group. Although they all looked like they were about to die, the two men still stared vigilantly at the woman as if preventing her from playing any tricks. As soon as Yimo arrived, the three were immediately frightened. It was in the middle of the night in the desert and a figure suddenly appeared. No matter how brave they would still be frightened. Although they were shocked, it was obvious they had no strength left to get up. However, one of them pointed a gun at Yimo but didn't fire. Yimo noticed their cracked lips and their sandstorm-tattered clothes. It was obvious they had been in the desert for a while. Who are you? A person holding a gun asked nervously at Yi Mo. Are you a human or a ghost? The woman looked very threatening, but how could she not be afraid seeing a person carrying a bag in the middle of the night in the desert? She subconsciously moved toward those two men, but perhaps she was out of energy, so she only moved a little bit. Who I am is not important, but if you continue to point a gun at me, I'll guarantee you won't see tomorrow's sun, Yi Mo said faintly. He hated people pointing guns at him, and these three didn't look like ordinary people. Even when they were fatigued by the desert, he could still feel their ferocity, whether it was the woman or the two men. To Yi Mo's surprise, the person suddenly took the gun back and coughed before saying tiringly, I hate the morning sun right now. Yi Mo suddenly felt this person was a bit cute and smiled. You are lost in the desert? At this moment, the three could be sure Yi Mo wasn't a ghost, he should be someone exploring the desert. The man who packed the gun away also felt relieved, perhaps they could be saved by this person. At this moment, he didn't ask Yi Mo for water and said admiringly, Brother, I really admire you, you can survive in the desert as if you were taking a stroll. Don't tell me you came here on foot. Yi Mo didn't answer the man's words and looked at the other two. The man explained, I'm Li Hu, and this is my partner in crime, Cheng Hongzhe. We were apprehending a criminal in the desert, but we lost our way. Our car is out of oil, so we dumped it in the desert. We wanted to ask for backup, but our communication and GPS were all useless. Then, we walked some distance trying to find a place with signal, but it was worse. We are still lost, and it has already been many days now. Seeing Yi Mo didn't talk, Li Hu took out his phone and said, Originally, I thought we could still call for help even if we were lost, but a few days later, the phone was out of battery. Plus, in order to capture her, we went into the desert in a hurry and basically didn't prepare anything. Although we caught her, but we're trapped in the desert and probably will die in a day or two. This Li Hu seemed to be free-spirited and didn't take death seriously. Yi Mo looked at the woman thinking that although she had been tortured by the desert to the point that she couldn't move, her ferocity was still there. Since they were capturing criminals, it meant these two were from the police or another department like that. Shameless, you two are the criminals. Is that thing yours? What right do you have to get it from me? Besides, it's not even on me, the woman immediately rebutted, and her tone was rather contemptuous. Yi Mo couldn't be bothered with these things. He didn't care who was right or wrong. Seeing these three unable to sustain much longer, he took out 15 bottles of water and gave 5 to each. Since these three weren't from the same group, he would give it to them separately in order to avoid conflict. He didn't give them food since he had seen some food in their bags. Thanks, brother, I don't need this much. 3 are fine, you are still in the desert, keep some for yourself. Li Hu took some water and thanked him immediately. Yi Mo gave them water because he had found a lot, and another reason was because that yellow-dressed woman was generous when saving him. He felt he was affected too. Of course, Yi Mo liked Li Hu's personality. This person was optimistic. Now that he told Yi Mo to keep some, Yi Mo had a better impression of him. Cheng Hongzhe took the water and thanked Yi Mo but didn't say the water was too much. He quickly opened a bottle and drank everything. He looked at the remaining water and didn't continue drinking. He knew he couldn't drink too much now. The woman took the 5 bottles and thanked Yi Mo excitedly. Thank you, you are a really good person. I'm called Feng Tian, and I only need 3 bottles too. Then, she gave 2 bottles back to Yi Mo. Yi Mo waved his hand. I still have 10 bottles, you don't need to give it to me, I have enough. However, he felt Feng Tian's temperament didn't match with her name, 1. She looked ferocious, but her name was very docile. Cheng Hongzhe saw that out of the 3, he was the only one to not say anything and drank first. He felt quite awkward. Li Hu drank half a bottle and felt that he had recovered a lot. Then, he looked at Feng Tian and said, Okay, you say you're not a criminal, but do you dare to say you weren't from Beisha? You dare to say that the explosion in Tandu a few months ago was unrelated to you? Are you still going to say you didn't take that thing? We already said. As long as you give me that, I can even give you payment and won't look for trouble. Besides, do you even need it? Feng Tian opened her mouth but eventually didn't say anything. Note: 1. Tian means sweet. Chapter 106, Chase. Chapter 106, Chase Yimo suddenly understood. The explosion a few months ago at Tandu was done by Wendong and him. Back then, he had heard Gong Huishan say that Wendong was from Beisha. Although Yimo didn't know what kind of organization it was, now that Li Hu said that Feng Tian used to be in Beisha too, he finally understood why he felt that familiar feeling from her. It was because of Wendong. Yimo looked at Li Hu and suddenly smiled. You actually accused wrongly Feng Tian this time because first, she doesn't have what you're looking for, and second, she hadn't even tried to take it. Yimo didn't tell them about the explosion a few months ago, he only helped Feng Tian because she was indeed innocent and hadn't exposed Wendong. Besides, Li Hu also said that if she had taken it out and gave it back, she wouldn't be held responsible and would even be rewarded. Nonetheless, this thing was kind of useless to Yimo. How do you know? Do you know what we're looking for? Li Hu just recovered some strength after drinking water. He stood up, but his body was still weak. Yimo waved his hand. You don't need to know how I know, but since you mentioned a reward for this thing, we could make a deal. It doesn't matter even if I sell it to you, my friend doesn't need it anyway. Li Hu immediately called out in surprise, of course we agree, definitely. Name a price, we will definitely accept it. He didn't even say that Yimo couldn't ask for too much. From this, it could be seen how important this thing was to him. Besides, he probably knew that if Yimo could give water to strangers in the desert, he definitely wouldn't be some nasty person. Before Yimo could respond, Feng Tian yelled in surprise, do you know where Sister Dawn went? The hope in her eyes was obvious. This, I don't know. Yimo could tell that not only Feng Tian came from the same organization as Wendong, but they seemed to have left it together, and their relationship was quite good. Hearing Yimo's words, Feng Tian's eyes flashed with a sliver of disappointment. Yimo, however, turned around and gave a look of approval to Li Hu, thinking that his name didn't match with his character. Seeing Li Hu looking desperately at him, Yimo smiled. How much can you give? $500,000, Li Hu said. Feng Tian immediately rebutted, this thing could easily sell for a few million on the international market. How can you even say 500,000? Li Hu's eyes flashed with guilt after hearing Feng Tian's words. For him, 500,000 was the highest he could give. After all, his department wasn't the same as those foreign departments. He also understood his price was absurdly low, perhaps not even 10% of its worth. Yimo could tell from his expression that 500,000 was probably the highest price Li Hu could afford. Anyway, he really didn't need it, and it took up a large space in his bag, which annoyed Yimo quite a bit. Since he had a good impression of Li Hu, he wouldn't waste time, that he surely didn't have, haggling on a model that was useless to him. Now, his main purpose wasn't to earn money, but of course, it was always good to have money, and Yimo was very satisfied if he could get $500,000 out of nowhere. In fact, 500,000 is indeed a bit low. How about I give another 200,000? Li Hu said awkwardly. Cheng Hongzhe suddenly interrupted. Li Hu, where are you going to get another 200,000? Are you going to use your own money? Before Li Hu replied, Yimo waved his hand and said, okay, 500,000 is good, I'll sell it to you. Then, Yimo took out that model and the information and passed it to Li Hu. You're talking about this, right? Li Hu was stunned as he had never expected things to be so successful. Feng Tian, who hadn't expected that it would be on him, was also surprised. Li Hu finally understood and took it as if he were dreaming. He flashed it with a torch and said, yes, it's this, thank you. I really didn't expect to find this in the desert. However, I don't have any money with me. Even Li Hu felt embarrassed himself. Although this was very important to him, it still didn't belong to him. He couldn't just speak empty words. However, Yimo smiled and said, then you owe me, leave me a number, I'll call you when I get back, and you'll give the money to me then. What? Not only Li Hu was shocked, but even Feng Tian and Cheng Hongzhe were surprised and wondered how someone could have so much trust when doing business. Li Hu really didn't know what to say. He could tell Yimo wasn't an ordinary person, but he didn't expect him to be so trustful. He didn't ask how Yimo got the thing because he didn't want to know the details. Everyone had their own secrets, and since this person trusted him so much, he shouldn't be too curious about it. After thinking about it for a moment, Li Hu saluted, friend, I, Li Hu, won't be too polite with you since it doesn't only concern me, but we are definitely friends now. I also want to ask for your name, otherwise, I wouldn't know who to give the money to. I'm Yi Mo. Yi Mo didn't hide his name. Wen Dong already knew it anyway, and the Song family should be aware of his presence here too. Yi Mo. Li Hu repeated but didn't think about it too much. Then, he said, my number is 13817XXXX, Beijing. Suddenly, Li Hu stopped because he realized Yi Mo had already disappeared, only a bottle and a compass were left behind. Immediately after, a voice reverberated, there are 3 pills in the bottle, take one each, and you will recover soon. Goodbye. Li Hu picked up the bottle and thought for a long while before saying, Brother Yi is really a magical person. Then, he opened the bottle and looked at the 3 black pills. Can this thing even be eaten? Cheng Hongzhe looked at the pills and frowned. As long as Brother Yi gave it, I believe they are edible. Then, Li Hu ate one without hesitation. Feng Tian sneered and also took one from Li Hu's hand. Only Chen Hongzhe was hesitating as he looked at the remaining pill. Afterward, Feng Tian stood up with a face full of surprise. She whipped her hair and said joyfully, there are actually such magical pills. If you don't want this, give the remaining one to me. Then, she tried to take the remaining pill in Li Hu's hand. Li Hu was also surprised. He thought that this pill was so magical. He only took one, and he immediately felt his fatigued body recovering. Seeing Feng Tian trying to snatch it, of course, he didn't give it to her, and instead threw it to Chen Hongzhe, quickly eat it. Recover your strength, and we will leave the desert immediately. Then, he looked at the direction Yi Mo disappeared before mumbling once again, Brother Yi is really a magical person. He could possibly be from one of the ancient martial arts families. Only they would have such magical pill, and only they would be able to walk in the Taklamakan desert so casually. Yi Mo didn't have time to talk with them because he had felt that black shadow again. He wanted to know what this thing was and if it was sticking with him for the purple heart vine. Of course, Yi Mo only looked for 10 minutes or so and finally saw another obscure black shadow. Although it was very fast, Yi Mo's wasn't slow either. The black shadow looked like the root of a tree, and Yi Mo even wondered if it had transformed from a tree root. Even though Huyang trees were said to live for millennia, Yi Mo knew his idea was too otherworldly. Yi Mo was so focused on chasing the black shadow in front of him, he didn't even look at the direction or notice his path. However, this time he had his bag with him and didn't need to worry about this. He didn't believe that a desert could devour a cultivator with supplies. So a few hours later, when the sky was getting brighter, Yi Mo could already start to see what was in front of him. That black figure really was a Huyang tree root. The sky was bright, and Yi Mo wouldn't worry about this thing getting away. But now, when this thing was right in front of Yi Mo, it suddenly disappeared again. If it wasn't for the fact that Yi Mo had been prepared and left a spirit sense mark on the nail, he would have lost it again. At this moment, Yi Mo had finally understood. No wonder it kept appearing and disappearing when he chased it the night before. This shadow could travel through the sand, and without the mark, he couldn't keep up with it. And now that Yi Mo understood, he wouldn't let it go. This thing was extremely fast in the sand too, but Yi Mo kept a tight chase. He refused to believe that he couldn't chase up an animal in the desert. This shadow not only had a strong life force but stamina as well. After playing tag with Yi Mo in the desert for the entire day, it finally slowed down. Yi Mo also gasped a breath. He was feeling tired. He took out a bottle and drank it clean. Suddenly, Yi Mo was dumbfounded. Originally, he knew this thing was deep in the sand, so he was still able to track it down, but now, this shadow appeared to have understood Yi Mo and went deeper and deeper into the sand, until it gradually reached out of Yi Mo's maximum detection range. Yi Mo's spirit sense mark could be felt at most within 50 meters. But now, this shadow went more than 50 meters underground and, eventually, Yi Mo lost the shadow completely once again. Yi Mo stood depressed at where the shadow dug down and was very annoyed. He was wondering if he should dig open here and look, but it was too dangerous to dig randomly in the desert. He still had a clear memory of the danger when he almost sunk into the desert. Note: 1. Who means fox here? Chapter 107, Underground Desert. Chapter 107, Underground desert. Yimo really didn't want to give up something he had been chasing for a whole day and night. But now, he knew it was hiding underground, and there was nothing he could do. If only he were in the third stage Kai gathering, he wouldn't hesitate to dart into the desert. In the third stage, he wouldn't be afraid of being thirsty because he would be able to use the most important magic of all, water ball art. With the water ball art, he would be able to convert spirit Kai into water, and as such, he would never have to worry about dying of thirst. Furthermore, in the third stage, he wouldn't die even if he didn't breathe for a whole month in the desert. Unfortunately, one level difference was huge. This was a milestone. This black shadow was targeting him. Yimo came to the conclusion that it was definitely his purple heart vine that attracted it because other than that, he brought the same thing as everyone else. It was only the purple heart vine that other people didn't have. However, this thing was quite sneaky. He could think of killing Yimo first before taking his stuff. Then, Yimo suddenly thought of something important. He had been chasing this black shadow for a whole day, but why did it only crawl into the depth now? According to its cunningness, it should have thought of this idea long ago. What did this mean? It meant that it could only crawl in at specific locations. Thinking about this, Yimo immediately rejoiced. This place looked the same as any other part of the desert, but there were too many mysterious remains buried underneath, including all those ancient cities lost in the flow of time. Perhaps this place was a tunnel towards an underground city, and maybe, the whirlpool he fell into last time was also a tunnel towards an underground city. Sigh. Thinking about it, Yimo felt a little disappointed again for not being in the third stage yet. Yimo set his gaze on his bag. He still had 10 bottles of water, plus the bag of water the yellow-clothed woman gave to him, and all the pills Yimo had made. With these, he would be fine even if he was buried for half a month under the sand. What was he afraid of? He came for the purple heart vine in the desert. Since that thing also came for it, it meant that it had seen it before. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so sensitive. Let's go inside. As soon as Yimo made up his mind, there was no stopping him. He took out a shovel from his bag and started to dig where the black shadow disappeared. Sand flew as Yimo dug deeper, and soon, he was already more than 10 meters in. It was already starting to feel suffocating, but something like that was nothing to Yimo. He was a cultivator, albeit being only in the second stage of Kai gathering, he could still breathe internally with enough water. Yimo's digging speed was very fast, and 3 hours later, he had already dug more than 100 meters. His method consisted of digging a big chunk and sending it back before pushing away the two sides. If his bag hadn't been so large, perhaps he would have been 200 meters in by now. At that moment, Yimo estimated that the tunnel behind him should have already been blocked completely. He dug another 200 meters, and his shovel suddenly hit something hard. Yimo felt overjoyed. He should have arrived. This hard thing should be a rock, and as Yimo scanned with his spirit sense, he discovered that it was indeed a big green rock. It was very thick, almost a meter in diameter. Yimo wasn't impetuous. He sat down first and took a pill with some water to recover his Kai. He was digging diagonally, so this stone was probably around 200 meters underground. After he had taken an hour to rest, Yimo completely recovered his energy. He gathered the Kai into the metal spade and hacked towards the stone. Immediately, rubble flew everywhere. The stone was like mud under Yimo's spade. In less than half an hour, Yimo dug a meter-deep hole into the stone. Just when Yimo crawled into the hole, the sand outside fell into the hole and quickly covered it up. The place Yimo landed was very spacious and looked like a street. However, there was a bad odor everywhere that was weird and indescribable, similar yet unlike of a rotten smell. He followed the street and walked tens of meters while expanding his spirit sense out. Finally, he realized it wasn't a street, but a road made of stone blocks. Yimo carefully walked forward along this road, keeping his spirit sense on the surrounding because he was sure that Black Shadow also came here. He just didn't know where it was. And, Yimo was sure that there were entrances other than the one he dug up which perhaps didn't even need digging. After walking for a while, Yimo hadn't seen a single house on the side of the road, and instead, thought that it looked a lot more like a valley, so it became obvious that this place wasn't some underground city. As if he had just sensed something, Yimo stopped his footsteps, and even though he was a cultivator, he felt the atmosphere around became eerie. A row of huyang tree roots was lined up at the two sides, and what gave Yimo goosebumps was one of the huyang tree roots. He could clearly see with his spirit sense that the root had a metal nail on it, one that had been marked with his spirit sense. His nail had really hit a huyang tree root, and even if Yimo didn't want to believe it, the facts were in front of him, so he had no choice. There weren't such eerie feelings even in the cultivation realm, but here it had occurred right in front of his face. Yimo definitely wouldn't believe that such a huyang tree root could avoid his tracking for a day and night and still move so fast. Besides, that huyang tree root appeared to be anchored there and wouldn't be able to move from this position. Yimo was on full alert as he walked beside the huyang tree root. He studied it carefully with his spirit sense and realized that his speculations appeared to be right. It seemed that it was really the metal nail that he had thrown, but in order to confirm it, Yimo took out his torch and saw with his own eyes that the metal nail on it really belonged to him. His spirit sense was right. It made Yimo wonder how a huyang tree root could move so fast. He didn't touch that nail and instead went into contemplation. Suddenly, Yimo remembered that 2 days ago, he had hit the black shadow around its shoulder, but this huyang tree root had the metal nail on its upper body. The position wasn't right. Then, Yimo found another problem. He saw that this nail had been exposed a bit on the outside. Yimo thought that, with his power, if he were the one to have shot this nail at the root, there was no way that the nail wouldn't be completely lodged inside. All these signs showed that Yimo wasn't the one that inserted the nail there, but it was done later by someone or something else. Who could put a nail in the huyang tree root? Yimo frowned and carefully pulled the nail out. Soon, he found some blood and even a long strand of hair. This nail really was put there by something. He could tell by looking at the hair that the thing that had been hit was probably a monkey-like animal. Yimo found it very strange that there was such animal in the desert. However, he knew that monkeys and apes were very smart, so it was natural that they could think of such ways. When Yimo thought the problem clearly and knew what sort of animal he was chasing, everything became so clear. This animal was not only very smart but also good at running away. There was only one road underneath the desert, and other than the huyang tree roots, there were sand and stone boards. It seemed that a long time ago, someone made this stone block road leading to somewhere, and even specially planted the huyang tree root at the side. Yimo increased his speed and walked along the stone road. He knew that since the shadow could escape here, it meant that it had already run inside. As long as he followed this road, he could chase up to it. However, what made Yimo disappointed was that he had walked here for half a day, but not only did he not see the shadow, he also didn't even know if there was an end to this road. If it wasn't a one-way road, Yimo would have thought that he was lost again. After so long, Yimo estimated that he probably wouldn't be able to catch up to the shadow and felt helpless. The place this thing had escaped to was too absurd, and besides, it was too smart. Yimo didn't bother tracking the shadow anymore and didn't even look at what was on the side. He simply started to rush forward. After another half a day's time and a few turns on the road, there was finally a stairway leading up. However, it wasn't long, only 20 to 30 meters or so. Yimo walked up to it and scanned out with his spirit sense, then he understood that he came to another open space. However, a huge stone was blocking the entrance. He ran for an entire day around on the stone block road and had no idea which hairy animal had tricked him. This road was probably more than 10 kilometers long but was a bit curly, giving enough time for Yimo to think more thoroughly about this place. Who planted this with huyang trees at the side? Why is that road so long? This was a hefty project. Could a huyang tree grow underground? Yimo wasn't sure if it had grown above the ground before and then sank down. Since Yimo wasn't able to know for sure, he shook his head and walked to the end of the stairway. He moved the stone block, however, no sand fell, which implied that it wasn't covered by the desert. He walked through the entrance and discovered an immense underground desert. However, when Yimo scanned with his spirit sense again, he couldn't help but be immediately shocked. Chapter 108, Re-encounter. Chapter 108, Re-encounter. The scene he saw was a desert, but this wasn't the main point. The main point was that it was grown full of purple heart vine. Under the scan of Yimo's spirit sense, there were hundreds of them. Yimo took out the torch and shone it over the surroundings. There was a dense patch of purple heart vine even in the distance. Furthermore, they were even thicker than the wrist. They definitely had been growing for thousands or even tens of thousands of years. Purple heart vine, although it is the spirit herb of the lowest level in the cultivation realm, it would be very valuable if it was more than 3,000 years old. One could even sell it for hundreds of spirit stones, but now, there's so much here. Yimo held his breath. He was indeed shocked. He did find purple heart vine, moreover, there was so much and they were all very old. However, he didn't feel the slightest sense of joy. Instead, he felt a faint sadness. What was this? Yimo didn't move. Instead, he closed his eyes and felt with his spirit sense. Indeed, this place was surrounded by purple heart vine. He saw right, but that faint sense of sadness was also real. Suddenly, Yimo noticed a problem. It was that purple heart vine was a spirit herb and they had been growing for many years, making them high-level spirit herbs. However, he didn't feel a sense of spirit kai here. What was this? The purple heart vine still laid across the desert and didn't even change their shape at all, so even if these purple heart vine had withered, they could still be used for medicine. Yimo walked close to a purple heart vine slowly and he felt a sense of rotting well up in his heart. He blew lightly, and the 3-meter-tall purple heart vine actually turned to dust. Yimo was stunned. He walked to a few more and blew. These purple heart vines all turned to dust and disappeared. As if feeling the moment of Yimo's arrival, these thousands of purple heart vine all turned to dust. If Yimo didn't see it for his own eyes, he would have thought something eerie happened again. The desert full of purple heart vine suddenly disappeared in an instant. Yimo stood there without moving, feeling extremely bitter. He looked for a long time and finally found the secret of the purple heart vine. However, this secret was useless to him. He had lost his interest of going to Kulu. Since he already found purple heart vine here, there was no point going elsewhere. Plus, even if Kulu had purple heart vine, it probably wouldn't be better than here. Yimo walked into the desert. No one seemed to have come here before. This desert wasn't big, and soon, he reached its end. A huge stone tablet stood before Yimo with the 2 words Ku Lake. So this was Ku Lake. It seemed that Ku Lake, like Luobu Lake, was a big lake but eventually turned into desert. Yimo put his hand on the tablet, feeling a faint sense of disappointment. He didn't get what he wanted coming to the desert. It seemed that he could only return to his clinic and slowly cultivate his silver heart grass. However, if he wanted to do that, he needed to keep a low profile and Yimo didn't really want that. Even if he wanted to, he already exposed himself in the Taklamakan, so perhaps he wouldn't even be able to keep a low profile. Yimo's thoughts suddenly stopped. He looked at his hand in surprise as he felt a faint sense of spirit kai pass from the tablet to his hand. However, that spirit kai was too weak, almost unable to be used for cultivation. However, even so, he still needed to make out the situation. He just dug out this tablet and cleaned up the dirt around it. A dried-up spirit kai appeared in front of Yimo's face. No wonder there was some spirit kai, it was a dried-up spirit well. Yimo was disappointed, however, because he understood why there was so much purple heart vine here. Originally, there was a spirit well here. This was really a pity. If this spirit well still had water, Yimo would perhaps even want to live here. Although it was dark, it was better than having no place to cultivate. Yimo felt the spirit well and sighed. He poured down a bottle of water and said, "A spirit well actually doesn't have water, then, I'll give you some water." In the desert, perhaps only Yimo would do such a thing. He was a cultivator and had a natural gratitude towards spirit wells and spirit things. Plus, he didn't mind giving this bottle of water. Since he didn't find the purple heart vine, he was about to go out. When Yimo poured the water down the spirit well, something surprising happened. The spirit well actually emitted a thin spirit kai as though repaying Yimo's bottle of water. Yimo felt this and surprisingly discovered that he could cultivate with this spirit kai. Thinking about this, Yimo was no longer stingy and poured all the water he had down, including the bag of water the yellow-dressed lady gave him. As expected, the spirit kai increased a little. Yimo quickly sat down and cultivated. The reason he didn't care about water was that he was in the latter part of stage 2. As long as he could reach stage 3 with this spirit Kai, he wouldn't care if he had no water, because at that time, he would be able to use water magic. Time passed fast as he cultivated. Imo didn't know how long he cultivated for, but it was approximately 3 to 4 days. When he woke up, he found that there was no more spirit Kai from the well. Imo could only helplessly stood up. This spirit well had been dry for too long, and because of that, it wasn't enough for him to reach stage 3. However, Imo felt his power and discovered he was at the peak of stage 2, just a thin line from level 3. Perhaps in less than 2 years, as long as the opportunity came, he could ascend to level 3. Imo bowed to the spirit well. No matter what, this spirit well helped him a lot. However, Imo knew that no matter how much water he had, perhaps this spirit well could only emit this last spirit Kai. Imo didn't know how this place formed, but it seemed that someone intentionally used the desert as a barrier to protect this spirit well and purple heart vines. After eating some simple food, Imo walked over to the staircase and climbed up another staircase. A few minutes later, Imo arrived at the bottom of a stone board again. He moved it aside and sand fell, causing a piercing bright ray of sunlight to fall on his eyes. Knowing that he had already come out, he returned the board back before covered it up with sand. Perhaps one day, he would once again return here due to the dried-up spirit well. When Imo stood in the desert again, he realized he was actually in a patch of forest. However, this forest was dead. There were dead huyang tree roots everywhere. Just when Imo was thinking if this was the legendary demon forest, a few gunshots interrupted his thought, making him frown. There were gunshots. Did Nanqing's people chase here? But then he thought that even if it were Nanqing people, they wouldn't shoot without seeing him. But soon, Imo understood. A yellow-dressed lady stumbled from the demon forest and dashed to the side. It was the girl who saved him. She had a red spot on her shoulder, she had already lost her bag, and a few men with guns even chased her here. Seeing their ferocious looks, Imo knew they were from Nanqing. A sense of guilt rose from Imo's heart. He didn't think that the woman who saved him was hurt due to him and being hunted. This woman not only saved Imo, but in Imo's heart, she was also like a goddess. However, now these bastards even dared to hunt her, so he immediately felt the intent to kill. The yellow-dressed lady was stumbling harder, causing Imo to be quite surprised. Even if she couldn't dodge the gun, these few men shouldn't be a match for her. Why was she like this? He didn't have time to think. Just when Imo was about to shoot out metal nails, a sudden chick-chick sounded. In the desert, it was rather piercing. This sound was getting louder and louder. Not only did Imo hear it, but also the girl and those few men heard the sound. All the people looked at the direction of the sound unanimously, and what they saw was a patch of bugs with a disgusting flowery pattern at its back. There was countless ones of them all crawling out of the sand. Immediately, they covered a huge patch of ground, and this was just the beginning. From that small area, they then covered hundreds of yards in a blink of an eye. These bugs had 4 legs and walked extremely fast. The front of their mouth seemed to only have a single tooth. When countless of these bugs suddenly appeared in the desert making the chick-chick sounds, everyone felt a chill ran down their bones even with the sun shining brightly. The 3 Nanqing people immediately reacted and wanted to escape for their lives. However, these bugs had swarmed up. In a few breaths, these 3 didn't even have any bones left. Even the gun in their hands were eaten. The bugs that were involved in devouring them immediately grew larger and blacker. Even the pattern on their backs were clearer. Imo gasped. He immediately thought of the yellow-dressed lady. She also saw the bugs, however, she no longer had any strength as her eyes reflected her loss in hope. Suddenly, she became really peaceful and just fell onto the sand. Chapter 109, Terrifying Human-Eating Bugs. Chapter 109, Terrifying Human-Eating Bugs. Imo looked at the swarm dashing for the yellow-dressed lady. He didn't even think before charging at the girl with his fastest speed. Just a few seconds before the bugs came, Imo carried the yellow-dressed lady and ran. As though discovering that the yellow-dressed woman was saved by Imo, these bugs were actually enraged, and they all swarmed towards Imo. Although the ordinary bugs couldn't keep up with Yimo, those thousands that have eaten human flesh evolved to have an extremely rapid pace. They weren't any bit slower than Yimo, perhaps they were even a little bit faster. However, what made Yimo shocked the most was that these few thousands bugs could actually half fly half walk at their fastest. If they were to eat more human meat, would they grow out wings? Yimo suddenly thought of locusts. If these bugs grew wings and flew out everywhere, then it would be a catastrophe. No one would be able to stop these bugs. Suddenly, Yimo remembered the human-eating bugs in the desert. Were these them? The bag of the yellow-dressed girl in his arms had long vanished. Her hair was messy, and her face cover was slanted, showing half of her immaculate face. Just that almost made Yimo lose himself. When he saw this girl with her face covered a few days ago, he was already astounded, but now that he saw half of her face, he felt even more astonished. There was actually such a woman in the world. However, Yimo couldn't care with that now because the bugs were getting closer and closer. With his current pace, those bugs would catch up with him sooner or later. Yimo was also getting more and more worried. If a few thousand bugs caught up with him and he was forced to a fight, those countless other bugs behind them would also catch up. Let alone his current second-level Kai gathering, even if he was at the third level, he would still get devoured. If he wasn't carrying someone, Yimo certainly had the means to escape. However, it was impossible for him to drop the yellow-dressed lady. Not only did he have good feelings towards this girl, but she also saved him. If it were to reduce the load, he could only drop his bag. At this moment, the yellow-dressed lady opened her eyes. Realizing that she was in Yimo's arms, she struggled a bit but soon discovered the tens of millions of bugs chasing behind them. She raised her head and saw Yimo's face full of sweat as well as the bugs that were closing in. For the first time, she opened her mouth and said, "Thank you. Put me down and save yourself." Although her voice was weak, the crystal-clear sound it produced almost made Yimo think that he was hearing a heavenly hymn. "Stop saying that. These bugs are so disgusting. If I drop you down, even if you're not scared of death, you would be disgusted to death." Yimo knew it was useless to threaten this girl with death. Surprisingly, the yellow-dressed lady seemed to take in Yimo's words and immediately stopped talking. Yimo felt relieved. Luckily, this girl could actually talk. This meant that she wasn't a mute. After a long time, the yellow-dressed lady said, "I'm Luo Susu." "Luo Susu?" Yimo repeated. Why did she have the same last name as his master? But immediately after, Yimo heard the chick behind him and replied, "I'm Yimo." "Yimo," the yellow-dressed lady repeated. Hearing the sound of the bugs which were closing anything, she didn't say anything. She repeated the name as though to remember the person who risked his life to save her, although they would probably will still die in the end. Yimo couldn't leave the girl behind. Watching the closing bugs, Yimo had no other choice but to drop his bag. He took out 2 bottles of pills, the brush Kai Wanqing gave him, the purple heartvine, and the silver heatgrass seeds. Then, after thinking for a moment, he took out another empty bottle before throwing the bag. Soon, the bag was bitten into oblivion by the millions of bugs. However, these bugs didn't even stop and continued to chase after Yimo. Without the cumbersome bag, Yimo's speed increased a lot, and eventually, it was about the same as the bugs. Yimo couldn't get rid of them, but they couldn't catch Yimo either. Only Yimo knew that with the current situation, he was at a disadvantage. These bugs could run for a few days, but he couldn't. With him carrying Luo Susu, perhaps a few hours later, he wouldn't be able to handle it anymore. He knew that he couldn't go on like this. Looking down on Luo Susu, he discovered that she had fainted once again. However, from her dry lips, he could tell she hadn't drunk water for a long time. Yimo felt guilty. She gave him water, yet she was thirsty to such an extent. But at the moment, he didn't have water to give her. Yimo really wanted to cut open his wrist and give her some of his blood, but he knew that even if he wanted to, the current situation would prevent him to do so. He was already in a life-or-death situation, and if he was to be injured, he would be giving himself to these bugs for dinner. Yimo couldn't continue like this. Suddenly, Hei turned around and stopped. However, these bugs didn't have any intention of stopping. Seeing Yimo stop, they swarmed him faster. Yimo raised his hand and a few fireballs flew out, exploding amongst the bugs and killing a big patch of them. Yimo rejoiced. He didn't think that the bugs in the desert would be afraid of fire. The outer layer of their skin seemed to have been covered in a layer of oil. They had no resistance against the fireball. Yimo's fireball was of the lowest grade, so he didn't expect it to be effective. Now that he found a way, Yimo was merciless. He continued to throw out fireballs after balls. These fireballs exploded again and again, and countless bugs were burned to death. The burnt bugs emitted a disgusting scent, making people want to vomit. However, these bugs didn't have any wisdom, and they still continued to swarm him. Yimo estimated that his fireballs just then killed more than half of the evolved bugs. He wanted to kill some more, but the countless unevolved bugs followed up, and he could only continue to escape. Since his Kai wouldn't be able to keep up, remaining still and releasing more fireballs wasn't a viable option. If he didn't reach the peak of the second level, he really wouldn't dare to do this. However, after Yimo's ravaging, only 2,000 bugs that could keep up remained. Yimo ran for a while and stopped releasing another few fireballs. When the bugs behind kept up, he started to run again. Using this tactic, Yimo finally escaped from the horrifying bugs by dusk, but he was almost dehydrated. He opened his parched throat and continued to run for another 2 hours, afraid that these bugs would suddenly catch up. He was terrified of these disgusting creatures. When the sky was completely dark, Yimo found a corroded wall. Without anything in hand, all he could do was to sit by the wall while carrying the unconscious Luo Susu. Yimo knew that the reason why she was still unconscious was because of thirst, however, he didn't have water. After resting for another hour, Yimo felt Luo Susu was really dehydrated. Although she seemed to be strong, but she could very possibly die of dehydration. As such, after thinking it through, Yimo cut open his wrist and pointed it at her mouth. Luo Susu drank a few mouthfuls and actually frowned. She didn't drink anymore, and Yimo didn't force her. After all, he still needed to find a water source. Since Luo Susu was unconscious, he needed to conserve stamina, otherwise, they could only wait for their death. Yimo took the bullet out from Luo Susu's shoulder and fed her another pill. He used his Kai to help her soothe her wounds and felt really fatigued. Thus, he slept against the wall with Luo Susu in his arms. When the next day came, the sun shone brightly again. Yimo felt he was fortunate that the Hu Yang tree root shadow didn't come. Otherwise, he would really be in danger. Yimo had come to the desert for more than 10 days, and the weather was getting hotter. Yimo knew that if he couldn't find a water source, let alone saving Luo Susu, even him wouldn't be able to get out of the desert. Soon, Luo Susu had woken up. She felt she was much better than yesterday, and she curiously looked at Yimo. She wanted to get up and walk herself, but discovered that although she was better, she still couldn't move. Yimo took out a biscuit and gave it to Luo Susu. "Eat something first. Later on, we'll try to look for a water source or a way out." Luo Susu shook her head. At the moment, she didn't want to eat anything at all. She just glanced at her shoulder and realized that the bullet seemed to have been taken out. Seeing Luo Susu look at her shoulder, Yimo was afraid that she would imagine things, so he quickly explained, "I've already taken out the bullet in your shoulder. Sorry, it's my fault. Those people were hunting me." Hearing that Yimo took out the bullet, Luo Susu's pale face unexpectedly showed some ruddiness but disappeared quickly. She didn't continue talking, and instead closed her eyes once again. Under the scorching sun, the temperature in the desert was over 50 degrees. Yimo didn't want to talk, even he couldn't handle it now. He survived another day, but he was yet to find any water source. He was getting more and more withered. At night, Yimo found a cave. Knowing that Luo Susu couldn't hold out much longer, he carried her inside it. Chapter 110, Bitter Well. Chapter 110, Bitter Well. In the wind-corroded caves, Yimo looked at Luo Susu, who was getting worse by the minute. He was very worried, but he has withered himself. If he gave Luo Susu some more blood, perhaps he really wouldn't be able to hold on. Yimo hated why he was just missing that little bit of spirit Kai to break through. If he was on the 3rd level now, there would be no problems at all. His mind wandered as he seemed to see that yellow-dressed girl give more than half of her water to him. After a long time, the figure of the yellow-dressed girl appeared to merge with his master Luo Ying. He could no longer tell if she was Luo Ying or Luo Susu. Suddenly, Yimo woke up once again. He knew he couldn't hold on any longer. But in his mind, he couldn't bear to watch the woman he brought agony die in front of his eyes. Thinking of this, Yimo perseveringly slit open his wrists without hesitation and pointed it at Luo Susu's mouth. Yimo's wounds healed very fast, but Yimo had made up his mind. As soon as his injuries healed, he would slice it open again. He had this deep feeling in his heart that Luo Ying was Luo Susu. Otherwise, why would he fall for her so hard? He didn't know how many times he cut himself, but Yimo felt a sudden sense of fatigue. He was aware that he was about to die. He didn't think that he still didn't walk out of this desert eventually. However, more intriguingly was that he died with a girl with surname Luo. Luo Susu, Luo Ying. Yimo had a smile at the corner of his mouth. He thought that he didn't belong here anyways. Since he was going and could die with the woman he fell for, he was satisfied. The moment he went unconscious, he didn't think about anything. It was just the figure of Luo Ying and Luo Susu in front of his eyes. One moment, it would be Luo Ying, another moment, it would be Luo Susu. Then, they merged. He didn't want to think. Regardless of whether it was Luo Ying or Luo Susu, he felt he was satisfied as long as he had one by his side. It was unknown how much time had passed, but when Luo Susu woke up, the moon was high in the sky. The whole cave was shone brightly by the moonlight. Suddenly, she realized that her face cover had been unveiled, her heart skipped. But soon, she found that Yimo's wrist was still at her mouth. The wound had formed a scab. She carefully removed Yimo's hand to discover that Yimo had slept on the sand. He was unconscious. He had his other hand around her waist but still kept a smile on his mouth. Luo Susu eventually understood that she was saved by Yimo. If it wasn't for Yimo's blood, she would have been long dead. Yimo risked his life bringing her out of the sea of bugs and then used his own blood to save her. But why would Yimo save someone he just met? Was it just because she gave a bag of water to him? Other than Lan Yu saving her life, for the first time, Luo Susu felt that she owed the young man in front of her. Although she might not live, but she still felt she owed him, even if she died immediately. Luo Susu had never been so close to a man before, much less being carried by one for 2 whole days and 1 night. The man below her had a pale face, but he was still smiling. She wondered what he was thinking about. Luo Susu extended her shaking hand and felt Yimo's face. Though there was some sand on it, his features were easily distinguished. There wasn't a bit of fat. The moment she touched his face, he suddenly gave her a sense of familiarity, but that feeling felt to be on the brink of existence and non-existence. Something that she just couldn't grasp. Did he die? Luo Susu suddenly felt melancholic. Although she hadn't found Ning Qingxue, she still repaid the debt she owed to Lan Yu as she was going to lose her life in the desert. However, how could she pay back the debt she owed to a man who had already died? He used his own blood to save her. Although she was still going to die, she would die after him. Luo Susu couldn't understand why Yimo would save her. She even imagined that when the bugs caught up, Yimo would dump her instead of dumping his bag. If he didn't save Luo Susu, maybe he would still be alive. However, he dumped his bag instead of dumping her. Her heart that never felt a ripple suddenly ruptured for a stranger. Her memory was simple. From the age of 5, she was taken away to study some secret arts. 12 years later, she returned to thank Sister Lan Yu once. The place she was at was the Hidden Doors. What she learned were the ancient Chinese martial arts. Those from the Hidden Doors were not allowed in the mortal world. In addition, the place she was at, the Peace Door, had to stay away from the ruckus of the human world. Thus, only she knew the hardship of her coming to help Lan Yu. Other than repaying her debt to Lan Yu, nothing else tying her to the mortal world. Thus, her memories before 5 years of living were city memories. Eventually, after that, it was Hidden Door memories, simple and innocent. Although she had a young heart, she would never have any emotional ripples. In her eyes, other than training, there was nothing else. But today, a strange man died for her, and for the first time, she felt moved. Not for anything else, just for his actions. The people from the hidden doors were cold and only focused on cultivation. No one would risk their lives to save another. But right now, Luo Susu met someone who was willing to give up his life to save her. Perhaps when he dropped that bag, he was already preparing for the worst. Why did he do that? Luo Susu felt that she almost couldn't control her emotions. She couldn't bear Yimo's death. Her eyes were cloudy. She knew this wasn't good for her, but she couldn't hold it. Susu, our way of cultivation is one that requires a serene heart. You must remember not to let anything affect your emotions, refrain from joy, worry, anger, pain. You must not get too emotional. Her master's words seemed to be echoing by her ear. However, Luo Susu just couldn't control her sorrow. She didn't know how her master controlled herself, but she couldn't even control herself over the death of a stranger. How could this be? Even if she owed him a life and she was about to die, why was she so sad? Suddenly, her heart ached as though all her power was about to leave her. Spew, Luo Susu spewed out blood. Looking at the thick red stain on the ground, Luo Susu's eyes were filled with dim sorrow. Was this the side effects of her cultivation method? She looked down again at Yimo, who had his eyes tightly closed. She still couldn't resist her tears as it fell onto his face and rolled into his mouth. Luo Susu suddenly thought if all her tears fell into his mouth, would he come back alive? Yimo, in a boundless darkness, suddenly saw a clear well. He felt he was very thirsty and he jumped into the well. He drank all the water, but there was very little and it was bitter. He opened his mouth and waited for more of the bitter water. Luo Susu's hand suddenly felt Yimo's heart beat. Although it was very faint, but it was still there. He wasn't dead. Luo Susu suddenly rejoiced. If only she had more water. Luo Susu didn't even think before grabbing Yimo's sword and slitting her wrist too. Blood immediately gushed out and she quickly pointed it to Yimo's mouth. She wanted Yimo to drink, but her blood was too viscous. Yimo couldn't drink it. In desperation, Luo Susu shed tears again. She sucked from her own wrist and fed it to Yimo's mouth. But with just that, she could no longer hold out and fell unconscious as well. Her blood was too thick and in just a moment, it coagulated. Yimo felt that bitter well water suddenly become viscous. His mouth seemed to feel a softness. He subconsciously gulped and his dantian felt some heat. Yimo was a bit conscious. He seemed to have noticed something and started to cultivate. He was getting more and more aware and was even sure that he was at the edge of a breakthrough. He wouldn't let this opportunity pass. Yimo's Kai continued to go through cycles of cultivation. 1 cycle, 2 cycles. That membrane which stopped Yimo from reaching the 3rd level was getting thinner and thinner. Charging and charging again as well. Yimo didn't have anything else in mind. He just wanted to break through that membrane. Luo Susu felt a warmth as well as something that seemed to calm her spirit. She opened her eyes, enjoying that sense. She felt that even if she died like this, she would be very peaceful. She was very grateful towards the young man who brought her away from the bugs, allowing her to choose such a peaceful way of death. But soon, she understood that Yimo's body emitted this sense. Yimo still didn't open his eyes. His face was still pale, but it had more blood than before. Luo Susu rejoiced. She knew she couldn't endure much longer, but if she could save this person, then she would have no regrets. She would have paid back everything and would be able to leave this world without any regrets. Then she had this sense that made her feel close to this man. She couldn't tell why she would feel such way. She slit open her wrist once again and sucked, passing the blood to Yimo's mouth. Yimo was at the critical moment of breaking through to 3rd level. He didn't expect such a thing to happen. But soon, he understood what woke him up. That viscous liquid in his dreams was Luo Susu's blood. That softness was her lips. He felt moved but just didn't know what that bitter water was. Other than his master Luo Ying, this was the first time Yimo was moved by a woman. He didn't like to shed tears and never did, but now, his eyes felt sore. Yimo wanted to stop Luo Susu's suicide, but he couldn't at this moment. He needed to focus all his effort on breaking through. Only then could he save both of them. Luo Susu suddenly raised her hand and wiped the tear from Yimo's eye as she mumbled, "Sister, you said today is my birthday. I didn't think I would have my last birthday here." Then, she fell on Yimo and fainted. Like Yimo, she fainted with a smile on her face. Regardless of whether she could save Yimo, she did all she could. She didn't owe anyone and could leave without any regrets. Chapter 111, Third Level Kai Gathering. Chapter 111, Third Level Kai Gathering. At this moment, the Kai in Yimo's body had reached its maximum. Finally, he felt a rumble in multiple points of his chakra meridian. Immediately, he seemed lighter while feeling countless new Kai forming in his dantian. Everything became clearer. His spirit sense nearly reached a range of 50 meters. Was this the third stage of Kai gathering? He held down the join in his heart as he suddenly wanted to howl. Countless hopes, and he finally reached third stage Kai gathering. Suddenly, Yimo remembered Luo Susu, who was still unconscious in his arms. He thought about the hand she felt his face with and was struck with another fit of worry. He knew Luo Susu was on the brink of death. Yimo immediately used a water ball magic, and a water ball filled with spirit Kai formed in his hand. Yimo put the water into an empty bottle and fed it to Luo Susu's mouth. However, Luo Susu couldn't drink the water in Yimo's hand. Her face was pale and had a smile at the corner of her mouth. Her flawless face was like the goddess from heaven, making Yimo's heart ache. Yimo used another water ball to wash her face. He thought and started using his Kai to help her recover her dried-up life essence. Yimo only forcibly reached third stage in such a bad environment. He didn't even consolidate his power. If he was to help recover Luo Susu, it would be very hard, and with one mistake, he would break all his meridians. However, Yimo didn't care at all. Even if he was going to be useless, he would still save this woman. And there was something Yimo didn't dare to think about. In his heart, there was more than one, that this girl and the figure of his master merged together. Yimo's spirit Kai flowed incessantly into Luo Susu's body, helping her repair her meridians. If a cultivator were to see what Yimo was doing, he would think Yimo is crazy. A mere stage 3 Kai gathering dared to do something like this. This was suicidal. Even a stage 6 wouldn't dare to use his own Kai to repair meridians for others, yet Yimo did it when he was a mere stage 3. Yimo was indeed very tired now. He felt he was running out of spirit Kai and once again felt the danger of lack of water. However, he knew he couldn't stop and wouldn't stop. Since he did it, he must save Luo Susu. Otherwise, his heart wouldn't be at rest for his entire life. Luo Susu had a long dream. She saw herself fall into a big fire pit as countless fire rushed towards her, consuming her. She felt she wanted to get out, but the fire prevented her. At this moment, a man helped her block the fire and take her to a cool forest. She really enjoyed the forest and didn't feel distressed at all. The annoying things in her body was soothed by the serenity of this place. Other than feeling a little thirsty, she really liked this place. "I'm thirsty," Luo Susu said subconsciously. However, that man who helped her block the fire didn't turn around. She felt his body was shaking. "What's wrong with you?" "I'm a bit thirsty," Luo Susu said once again. She believed that must be a lake in front. She only needed to scoop some water and she would be able to drink. However, she couldn't move. Finally, the man turned around. His face was pale and covered in sweat. He smiled at her. "Go drink." Then, the man fell over. Luo Susu worried and hurried to hold up the man who saved her and blocked the fire. However, she stumbled and the man had disappeared. She also opened her eyes and felt she was still in Yimo's arms. However, other than feeling a little thirsty, she didn't feel any discomfort. She even felt comfortable, just like in her dreams. What happened? Why wasn't he awake? What happened to herself? She knew her situation. How did she suddenly get better? Luo Susu suddenly felt that there was something beside her hand. It was a full bottle of water. She exclaimed and wondered where this water came from. Why would it suddenly appear here? She couldn't explain it but didn't want to think. She opened the bottle and pointed the water at Yimo's mouth. At the same time, she wiped sweat from Yimo's forehead. Was it he who blocked the fire in her dreams? Yimo finally felt water. He drank a few mouthfuls and opened his eyes. He looked at Luo Susu, who fed him water, and smiled happily. He finally succeeded. Although he used up all his spirit kai and was in a rather dangerous situation, he didn't fail eventually. He successfully saved Luo Susu. And her cultivation would be faster. Too bad she didn't cultivate. If only she could cultivate with him. You're awake. Luo Susu looked with joy at Yimo, who had just opened his eyes. For the first time, she felt that there was joy in this world. Drink some water too, I don't need it. I just need to rest for a bit. Then, Yimo closed his eyes and recovered his spirit kai. Luckily, he was just extremely fatigued and didn't injure his foundation. Luck amongst luck. Perhaps this was good fortune for those who do good deeds. Seeing Yimo close his eyes, Luo Susu knew there was no major problems with him, and so she took the bottle and drank a few mouthfuls. It was cool and a faint sweet taste. Water was very tasty. She had never drunk water that was this good before. After drinking, she suddenly realized that Yimo had drunk from this before. But then, she shook her head, she had already kissed him. So what? However, Luo Susu didn't drink much. Although she was very thirsty and wanted to drink more, she still had to leave some for Yimo. And, she still wanted to ask Yimo where this water came from. Yimo closed his eyes and started recovering his kai. Luo Susu looked at him but didn't disturb him. She also saw there was a bag of biscuits on the side. She gave that to Yimo and didn't expect him to still have it now. In order to recover her strength, she took one and ate it while waiting for Yimo to wake up. Although it had been more than an hour and Yimo still didn't wake up, Luo Susu didn't seem worried at all, because she could tell from Yimo's breathing, which gradually calmed down. Although she didn't know what chi art Yimo was cultivating, she could tell it wouldn't be worse than the one she used. When Yimo woke up, the sky was already bright and a night passed just like that. He looked at Luo Susu, who had gotten out of his arms and sat on the side, feeling very happy that she was really well. Other than some weakness, her body had completely recovered. What made Yimo surprised and joyful at the same time was that Luo Susu didn't wear her face cover anymore. Instead, she took a bottle of water and looked at him quietly. Yimo saw Luo Susu's out-of-this-world complexion and was actually stunned. However, Luo Susu passed the water in her hand to Yimo. You drink some too, thanks for saving me yesterday. Although she didn't know how Yimo saved her, she knew that she wouldn't be alive if Yimo didn't save her. Yimo suddenly smiled and said, drink the water first, then we'll celebrate your birthday. However, I don't have a birthday present for you. Tell me, what present do you want the most now? Luo Susu stopped for a moment, but she immediately realized that Yimo must have heard her talk to herself to know that today was her birthday. She looked at Yimo's genuine smile and seemed to be influenced by it. She also became joyful. For the first time, she said cheekily, if the heavens could give me a small pond, even if it was just the size of a ball, it would be my happiest moment now. Then, she subconsciously looked at her body that was full of blood and dirt. She really did hope there was water so she could clean herself. Yimo smiled and said, wait here for me, I'll be back soon. Then, he turned and went into the cave. Luo Susu looked at Yimo's back and actually felt a faint reluctance for him to leave. But soon, she removed this emotion from her head. Her way of cultivation forebode having such distractions. If she did have other thoughts, she may even do damage to herself, much less cultivate this art. So those who cultivate the serene heat art will never feel emotional towards other things. This was also why it was very hard for her to come out. Because as soon as she was tied by the things in the mortal realm, it would be hard for her to progress in cultivation. Luo Susu sighed. She was lost in thought. She had Yimo's blood in her body and Yimo also had her blood. She was saved by Yimo and Yimo was saved by her. Was there really no ties between them? But no matter what, she decided to never come out again after she went back. Perhaps she really shouldn't have come out this time. When she went back, she would tell Sister Lan Yu that it would be very hard for her to come out again. Then, she thought about Yimo. This young man gave her such a deep-etched feeling. He seemed to have this metaphysical yet serene feeling on him. She really enjoyed staying with him, and ever since she woke up that feeling was growing more intense. He even gave her a faint sense of familiarity. That familiarity definitely wasn't because she saved him before and stayed with him in hardship. It was a real familiarity, and that made her feel very bewildered. Perhaps she knew him from their past life, Luo Susu thought. She would never show any feelings towards any man and wouldn't even talk to them. But the things she did for Yi Mo was way past her bottom line. She didn't even to look back on that. And he was mysterious. He could actually revive her and get a bottle of water. It was as though he would always have a way to do things when staying with him. Chapter 112, Birthday Present. Chapter 112, Birthday Present. Of course, Yi Mo didn't go to a very far place. He just dug a ditch a foot deep with an area of half a square meter on the hard rock inside the cave. Then, he continued to use his kai to convert spirit kai to clear water. Other than those that were sucked away by the rock, he used a whole half an hour to fill this ditch up. When Yi Mo returned to the cave, Luo Susu had already stood at the entrance of the cave looking around as if a normal woman looking for her husband's return. She wanted Yi Mo to come back earlier. Without Yi Mo, she felt emptiness and loneliness. She had never felt this before. Even when she was in the desert by herself for many days, she didn't feel like this, but today, Yi Mo only left for half an hour and she was having this feeling. "You're back." Seeing Yi Mo, Luo Susu felt joy from the bottom of her heart, but when the words came to her mouth, she could only say these few bland words. "Mim." Yi Mo nodded and smiled. Luo Susu felt Yi Mo's smile was very authentic and looked very nice, so she couldn't help but to smile too. Yi Mo had never seen Luo Susu smile. He only knew that she was extraordinarily beautiful without smiling, but now that she did, she was like the goddess from the heavens descending upon the earth. Yi Mo was lost in that smile and couldn't help to think of a poem. Looking back and charming the world with a smile, all the women in the royal palace look colorless in comparison. Perhaps this poem wasn't suitable because Luo Susu's smile didn't have the seductive sense of charm, but it made Yi Mo lose his spirit. Her smile was purely natural without a speck of dust. It was like a clear well or like a fresh spring breeze. Luo Susu blushed being looked at Yi Mo like that. Just when she wanted to say something, Yi Mo seemed to remember what he wanted to say. "Susu, come with me." "Susu." Luo Susu didn't object with what Yi Mo called her. She even wanted to ask where Yi Mo called her master the first time he saw her, but she eventually didn't ask. She didn't have too much curiosity. Yi Mo suddenly held Luo Susu's hand and ran towards that clear well he dug up. Luo Susu was shocked and was about to pull out her hand, but before she could, Yi Mo had already released it and pointed at that clear well and said, "Happy birthday. This is the birthday gift the heavens told me to give you. Do you like it?" Luo Susu stared dumbfoundedly at the pool of water in front of her. She couldn't suppress the joy and excitement in her heart for a long time. Was this really the birthday present the gods gave her? Otherwise, how could there be a pool of clear water in such a blazing sun? And the stone was very hard, it couldn't be man-made. "Thank you, Yi." Luo Susu suddenly turned around and looked at Yi Mo. She couldn't say any more. She once again felt the urge to shed tears. She even felt her power regressing, but she couldn't hold the joy in her heart. It wasn't purely because of this pool of water. It was when she wanted this pool of water the most, the water appeared right in front of her eyes. The thing that was impossible to attain appeared right in front of her. "Susu, our serene door must stay away from joy, concern, anger, sadness." But today, she felt sad, felt happy, cried and even fed a man with her mouth. Only today, she felt these emotions and she felt she was a normal person. She didn't want to think about those roles and didn't want those chain. Perhaps even if she wanted them, it would be when she got back to the serene door. She didn't dare to ask where this water came from. She was afraid that if she asked, she would wake up from this dream and this water would disappear forever. This was her first birthday present and her favorite one. Unfortunately, she couldn't take it away with her. Luo Susu walked beside the pond and scooped up water, drinking it. It had the same taste as before. There was a faint sweetness and a clean, refreshing smell. Luo Susu wanted to wash herself. She turned around but found that Yi Mo had already left. She felt gratitude towards him once again and said in a soft voice, "Thank you, Yi Mo, thank you for your birthday present." She didn't think about how Yi Mo got this pond of water and didn't think why it would be here. She was already satisfied and didn't want to doubt something she got so hard. Yi Mo stood by himself at the entrance of the cave waiting for Luo Susu. He suddenly thought if Luo Susu would be his master. But then, he immediately shook his head. Luo Susu obviously didn't have the same situation as him. She was herself, the same as her 20 years ago. But even knowing that she wasn't his master Luo Ying, Yi Mo still couldn't face her with a calm heart. And, Yi Mo kept this thought at the bottom of his heart that what if she was Luo Ying? Seeing Luo Susu wash up and come back, Yi Mo's eyes brightened up. He couldn't help but to be in complete awe for her. She didn't change clothes, didn't have any makeup, but one couldn't tell she had been in the desert for many days. He really didn't know how she did that with just water. She still didn't wear a face cover but held a bottle of water in her hand. Yi Mo didn't take the water from Luo Susu's hand, but instead passed a few biscuits to her and said, "This is what you gave me, you should eat a few too. I'm going out, what about you?" Luo Susu took the biscuit and nodded. "Emachem, we'll go out together." Perhaps. She didn't continue talking and paused for a bit before saying, "Did those men with guns come for you? Do you need me to help you?" Yi Mo shook his head and smiled, "I won't need your help for those people, let's go." Luo Susu didn't ask a second time. Since Yi Mo didn't need her help, it meant he had his ways. On the way, Yi Mo didn't ask Luo Susu what she was doing here and neither did Luo Susu. It was as though they just met. The return journey was very fast with Luo Susu's guidance. By night time, they had already arrived by a road. Although this was still inside the desert, they only needed to follow the road and they would be able to leave the desert. The Nanqing people seemed to have disappeared. Yi Mo and Luo Susu had reached a public road and there was not even one from Nanqing. However, they did meet another group that was going into the desert for adventure. It was already dusk time when Yi Mo met them. The group saw it was just the two of them and that they just came out of the desert without any equipment. The group provided a tent and some food and water for them. Luckily, it was dusk and Luo Susu's complexion didn't show, otherwise, it would cause a rupture. With these things, Luo Susu and Yi Mo didn't seem to be in a hurry anymore. Although they didn't talk much on the way, sometimes, they didn't even talk for a whole day, they liked this feeling of serenity. And what made Luo Susu even more grateful was that Yi Mo had never entered the tent, he was always outside. Even when she told him to come in and rest, he wouldn't come in, or he came in for a while and left. Even the time Luo Susu slept, her heart was very peaceful, because she knew Yi Mo was just outside the tent. Ning Qingxue and Kai Wanqing searched the desert for many days with the help of their group but still didn't have any news of Yi Mo. Their supplies were almost used up and the weather was getting hotter. Although Ning Qingxue and Kai Wanqing wasn't too keen, they could only follow the group out. The next time they could look, it would be near May to June. That wasn't a time when one can just come and leave the desert. Qingxue, look, there are people sleeping outside at the border of the desert. This is so romantic. The closest hotel is only 6 kilometers away. Although Kai Wanqing also wanted to find Yi Mo as soon as possible, Ning Qingxue seemed glum so she tried to find some conversation to cheer her up. Ning Qingxue looked at the tent in the desert but she was immediately stunned. The person at the door of the tent was Yi Mo. She suddenly felt her nose to be sour. She had looked arduously for half a month, but saw Yi Mo just when she left the desert. Was the heavens taking pity on her? Qingxue, what's wrong? Kai Wanqing saw Ning Qingxue's tears and looked over at the tent. It really was Yi Mo and he was standing right outside. It's brother Yi. Kai Wanqing suddenly felt as though she was going to suffocate. She was stunned and finally remembered to tell the driver to stop after a long time. Just when Kai Wanqing and Ning Qingxue charged off the car, they immediately stopped their steps. This was because a woman came out of the tent. She was actually living in the same tent with Yi Mo. I'm going. Luo Susu's words were very simple as though countless words weren't as meaningful as these few. I know. Yimo seemed bitter. He didn't know how to describe his current feeling. Silence. It was a suffocating silence. After a long time, Yimo said once again, "Can I go look for you?" Luo Susu didn't speak and suddenly took out a silk cloth and gave it to Yimo. "Help me wear it." Yimo helped Luo Susu put it on, and Luo Susu suddenly took the bottle of water Yimo gave to her. "I'll take this. Don't look for me, you won't find me. If you find me, it would do harm to us both. I won't say goodbye. Thank you for giving me the happiest birthday." Yimo fell silent. She thanked him not for saving her, but for giving her a birthday present. Chapter 113. People always meet at departure. Chapter 113. People always meet at departure. Looking at Yimo help Luo Susu put on the face cover, Ning Qingxue suddenly stopped in her steps. Yimo didn't notice her at all. Instead, he focused on helping the woman wear the face cover. It was as though there was only the woman standing in front of him in this entire world. The bitterness in Kai Wanqing's heart was as vicious as Ning Qingxue. She also stopped her steps towards Yimo as she looked at Yimo and that girl not knowing what to do. She didn't know their relationship, but they seemed so intimate. However, Kai Wanqing thought for a while but still walked over. Seeing Kai Wanqing walk towards Yimo, Ning Qingxue also collected herself. She suddenly thought, why would she be like that? Yimo married her to help her, why would she feel uncomfortable? If Yimo had someone he liked, she should be happy. She didn't want to marry Yimo because she loved him, instead it was because she was grateful towards him. Was it really like that though? She didn't dare to ask herself and she didn't have the answer either. At least, she knew she wasn't able to become happy now. Ning Qingxue? Kai Wanqing? How are you guys here? Yimo finally saw the two who came up. Ning Qingxue and Kai Wanqing could both only say one word. How should they talk? Were they going to say they came to the desert to look for Yimo because they missed them? However, Yimo was no longer the same Yimo. His EQ was no longer infinitely low. He could see what they meant. He could tell they came to the desert because of him. Kai Wanqing knew he was coming to the desert, but how did Ning Qingxue know? How did they know each other? You are Qingxue? Luo Susu suddenly asked, her tone was very plain. Yes, and you are? Ning Qingxue looked at this woman in surprise. Although she wore a cover, that beauty and figure even made Ning Qingxue feel insecure. She could imagine how stunningly beautiful this girl was once she took off her face cover. Kai Wanqing was also obviously attracted by Luo Susu. Even girls had a good impression of her naturally, much less men. Thinking about this, she looked at Yimo and sighed. Excellent people would always be found by others. She could find Yimo, but so could other people. I'm Luo Susu. Luo Susu's eyes flashed a look of relaxation as she said plainly. You are my aunt. Ning Qingxue finally understood that this woman was her aunt. The woman who lived in the same tent with her official husband was her aunt. Her eyes disclosed a sliver of disappointment, meanwhile her heart was in a mess. Although this aunt wasn't related to her, but it was still her aunt. She didn't think she would love the same man as her aunt. Ning Qingxue suddenly stopped thinking. Did she like Yimo? Although she didn't want to admit this, but she had to eventually admit that her care for Yimo had exceeded more than just guilt and gratitude. Yimo and Kai Wanqing both didn't expect that Luo Susu was Ning Qingxue's aunt. The atmosphere became awkward. Luo Susu didn't like talking, so after seeing Ning Qingxue was fine, she blandly said, Qingxue, your mother is very worried about you. You should call home and tell them you're out of the desert. Ning Qingxue lowered her head and said, I got it, aunt. Yi brother, did you finish your things? Kai Wanqing saw things were awkward, so she asked. Yimo nodded. It's done, I'm preparing to leave. Okay, then let's go together on the car. Kai Wanqing smiled and said. Luo Susu shook her head. No need, Qingxue, tell your mother then after I go back. Luo Susu paused and eventually didn't say that she wasn't coming out again. Before Ning Qingxue could reply, Luo Susu looked at Yimo and said again, I'm going. There was just those simple words without any other expressions. She knew that after this farewell, they would perhaps never see each other again. Although she felt some reluctance to leave, Luo Susu simply thought how Yimo saved her and gave her the happiest birthday present, which created this certain feeling. As long as she went back and cultivated, she could find her mental state once again and not be troubled by these things. As time progressed, she would perhaps forget about it. Yimo looked at Luo Susu's gradually disappearing figure and felt a faint sense of sadness. He really wanted to go up and say don't go, and just cultivate with me, but he couldn't find any reason to. Although Luo Susu looked very docile and silent, she had her own opinion on things. Finally, Luo Susu's figure disappeared. Yi brother, she had left. Kai Wanqing saw Yimo was still staring at the path Luo Susu left, so she could only remind him. Oh, she already left. Yimo suddenly woke up and saw Kai Wanqing and Ning Qingxue staring at him. He could only awkwardly say, I was lost in thought just then. Ning Qingxue lowered her head as if not wanting to talk, while Kai Wanqing sighed. Seeing their expression, Yimo coughed and asked, how are you two together? Kai Wanqing quickly adjusted herself and told about how she and Ning Qingxue went to Flowing Snake to look for him. Yimo looked at Ning Qingxue in surprise. He didn't expect her to go look for him at Flowing Snake. That wasn't a place a girl should go. It seemed that Fang Nan was a good person. He remembered that night when he treated Ning Qingxue and heard that she was well prepared and couldn't help but to feel guilty. Thinking about this, Yimo could only say, actually, some things aren't what you think they are. Don't go to a place like Flowing Snake again. If something happen, Yimo didn't know how to explain it to her. Sorry, Yimo, I just wanted to find you and apologize. I know many things weren't as I thought they were, and Ning Qingxue didn't know where to start and began to cry. She suddenly felt she was really weak and couldn't help herself when she saw Yimo. The thing Yimo was scared of the most was women crying, like Ning Qingxue right now. He didn't know what to do and could only stand there awkwardly. If he didn't hear her last words that night, he would be better, but after hearing that, his opinion of her greatly changed. Plus, Ning Qingxue risked her life to protect that silver heart grass. No matter what reason, he was grateful to her from the bottom of his heart. Seeing the atmosphere solidify once again, Kai Wanqing said, Yi brother, why don't we get on the car and talk as we go? Ning Qingxue also looked at Yimo hopefully. She really wanted to go back to that house again, but she knew the chances were too slim. Yimo shook his head and said, I won't come with you guys. I still have other things to do. We'll separate here, we'll see each other again if fate brings us together. After knowing Kai Wanqing and Ning Qingxue's intentions, Yimo didn't want to stay here with them anymore. Originally, he didn't have any feelings for the two. Now that there was a Luo Susu, he had less space in his heart. You're going now? Ning Qingxue suddenly felt her tone was shaky. She just suddenly thought of a sentence, I'm finally losing him again. Suddenly, she thought about when did she ever had him? Yes, I'm going. Yimo seemed to feel that his tone was the same as when Luo Susu left and felt it to be too simple, so he continued, you two should go back earlier. It's too dangerous in the desert. Sometimes, there are even things that can't be stopped by human force. He thought of the human eating bugs. If they came, even a train would be devoured, much less cars. I know. I'll go back immediately. Although Ning Qingxue was very disappointed that Yimo didn't leave with them and saw him being very intimate with her aunt, she calmed down now. Perhaps, what was hers will always be hers, but what wasn't hers wasn't something she could get by force. Although she felt bitter, but she had some unforgettable memories. After all, she lived with him for more than 20 days. Seeing his gradually departing figure, Ning Qingxue suddenly thought of what would have happened if she didn't break the marriage pact. Would he still leave like this? Thinking about this, Ning Qingxue shook her head. She was the one who left, but she didn't expect she would catch feelings for him while using him as a shield. Why didn't she care before? Perhaps sometimes, what people say are incredulous. Yi brother, if you have time, remember to go to Luo Kang, my cousin's company, Kai Wanqing hurried to say, seeing that Yimo was getting far away. She was much better than Ning Qingxue. Although she also had those intentions for Yimo, Yimo never promised her anything, and the moment she saw Luo Susu, she believed that only someone like her could be a match for brother Yi. I know. Yimo's voice traveled from the distance, and soon he increased his speed and disappeared. Yimo's voice still echoed beside their ears, but he was long gone. Ning Qingxue and Kai Wanqing stood there for a long time before Kai Wanqing said, "Qingxue, he already left, we should leave too." Then, the two no longer had the interest to talk anymore. In the morning, the sun just crawled up shining on Ning Qingxue and Kai Wanqing, dragging out a long shadow on the sand. Although there were two, they both seemed exceptionally lonely. Chapter 114, Nanqing Langji. Chapter 114, Nanqing Langji. The reason Yimo didn't go with Ning Qingxue and Kai Wanqing was because it was time for him to get revenge from Nanqing. They hunted him and even almost killed Luo Susu. If he didn't teach Qian Longqiu a lesson, then he wouldn't be called Yimo, and there was no need for him to cultivate. He was already at third stage Kai gathering now. Not only was his fireball art stronger, he could also use other magic such as invisibility, wind blade, windsurfing, and so on. He had once reached foundation establishment, so he didn't even need to practice these magic. He only needed to have the power, and he would be able to release it. He knew that Qian Longqiu was watching him near the desert. Perhaps as soon as he showed up, there would be people to take him to Qian Longqiu very soon. Yimo didn't think wrong. As soon as he left the desert, he didn't even enter the hotel. He was watched once again. However, Yimo wasn't the same Yimo half a month ago. He was worrying Qian Longqiu wasn't going to come and find him, but now that there were people watching him, he gladly welcomed them. Yimo entered a hotel, took a hot shower and got something to eat before sleeping. It had been a long time, so he estimated that Nanqing had already gathered the people they needed. As expected, just when Yimo was prepared to go out and buy some clothes for changing, he was once again stopped. The 5 men looked at Yimo as though he was a dead man. Yimo knew they had no concerns. Even if they opened fire in the public, Nanqing could probably deal with it. "If you know what's good, then come with us. Otherwise, don't blame us if we shoot here." The man at the front had long hair. When this man spoke, he didn't have any expression on his face. It was as though he didn't speak those words. Yimo knew they were sure he was the one they were looking for. Yimo looked down at his tattered clothes. He wanted to change, but there was nowhere to buy. He did have more than 1,000 on him though. They were already prepared for Yimo's resistance and take him away by force, but unexpectedly, Yimo said slowly, "Since we're going, then hurry up and lead the way." "What are you waiting here for? Did Qian Longqiu die?" "You." The man wanted to attack as soon as he heard Yimo's words, but was stopped by the man beside him. This man also sneered at Yimo. "I hope you can still be so tough on the mouth not long after. Get on the car." It was a normal business car that didn't even have a brand. The 5 men looked at each other when Yimo got on the car without any alarm. Soon, there were 4 people who sat beside Yimo surrounding him. The other man quickly drove off with the car. Originally, they thought Yimo would definitely not just surrender like this since he was so ferocious. As soon as Yimo had any resistance, they were prepared to go subjugate him at once. This was because all 5 of them were masters among masters. They weren't the rookies who went after Yimo in the desert. However, what made them more shocked was that Yimo actually just closed his eyes and started sleeping. The men looked at each other. They didn't understand if Yimo was asking to die or he was just thick-headed. One of the men suddenly raised the gun in his hand and the other 3 all nodded. Although Yimo had surrendered, it would be better if they could shoot him and just make sure he didn't die. However, before he raised his gun, the few men saw that the man who raised the gun had already fell into the seat. There was blood flowing out from his forehead. Between his eyebrows, there was a hole where blood poured out. The few men looked at their member who fell down in shock and couldn't speak for a long time. It was as though the hole on his head was natural. It was as though it just grew there ever since he picked up his gun. Yimo opened his eyes and scanned the people. "If anyone else dares to touch a gun, this what'll happen to you." Then, he closed his eyes and started meditating again. The man who was driving almost crashed the car onto the side of the road after losing concentration. Meanwhile, cold sweat trickled down the backs of the other men uncontrollably. Their foreheads started to sweat as well. What just happened? He almost didn't move with his eyes closed, yet one of their members with a gun was killed, and he was even killed with a metal nail in the head. It seemed that they were nothing different to the rookies who hunted after Yimo before in his eyes. He was never afraid to begin with. He was planning to look for trouble at their base. Thinking about the traceless metal nail, the man on the wheel was starting to shiver. The car fell into a deadly silence. No one dared to talk. Yimo's power had greatly exceeded their expectations. It wasn't something they could defend against. They could already imagine that Yimo only needed to move his hand and the person he disliked would definitely die under a metal nail. After a long time, their breathing finally calmed down. Perhaps it was because the person who came this time was Lang Ji. Lang Ji's surname was originally Lang, but because he was so savage, he acquired the surname of Lang. 10 years ago, in order to avenge a brother in Macau, he charged into one of the 3 biggest gangs in Macau, Sea Shark Gang, and killed more than 23 gang members including a master who had reached yellow level. Meanwhile, he was only lightly injured. After escaping, he met Chen Longtu who was at a Macau casino. Chen Longtu approved of Lang Ji greatly and took him in. Now, he was one of the 3 strongest people in Nanqing and the most savage among the group. Some have speculated that Lang Ji's power had reached middle stage of yellow level. However, no one knows because those who have seen him attack were all dead. This time, Chen Longtu sent Lang Ji to the desert to blockade Yimo. From this, it could be seen how much he hated Yimo. Although Yimo did kill one of them easily, and they didn't even see the action of Yimo killing, but everyone knew of Lang Ji's power. As long as they gave Yimo to him, they believed that Yimo would be no match for Lang Ji no matter how strong he was. Lang Ji had exceeded the range of normal masters. They have also heard that masters that have reached a level was not someone normal martial artists could hold against. As such, once they calmed down, they returned to normal. Yimo didn't decide to kill much people. Nanqing had this much people that even he wasn't able to kill them all. Plus, he didn't have much enmity with the other members of Nanqing. He only needed to teach Chen Longtu a lesson. Yimo will make Chen Longtu know that a cultivator wasn't someone to be so easily hunted. The car was getting faster and faster. The driver wanted to bring Yimo to Lang Ji as soon as possible. Perhaps Yimo was too terrifying. He killed someone with a metal nail without moving. Perhaps only masters like Lang Ji could suppress Yimo's fire. Yimo didn't worry at all. No matter how fast the car was driving, he was still meditating with his eyes closed. Even if the car drove off a cliff now, he could still escape. Although these people didn't know where Yimo got his confidence from, they were more confused by Yimo's calmness. Even if he wasn't afraid of attacks, was he not afraid of the car falling off the cliff? However, they didn't worry for long. It wasn't even an hour before the car drove into a town. The town produced a lot of jade. It was a town near the desert, however, it didn't have a long history and the streets were empty. The car twisted and turned before eventually entering a manor. The manor was very luxurious and had 2 rows of wutong trees, which gave it a high-class feeling. Yimo only understood how big this place was after getting out of the car. Just by seeing how there were 2 rows of buff men standing outside the place, he knew this was probably one of the biggest gathering places for Nanqing. He didn't need someone to lead, and he just walked into the house himself. Instead of a house, it might be better to say this was a meeting room. However, it just didn't have a round table. The area wasn't large and didn't even have seats. There were also people standing on the 2 sides, but there was only 12 of them. These people looked more ferocious than the people in the yard. Of course, there were no seats just for the people below. At the very top, there sat a man with a woman beside him. The man had a few scars on his face, but the worst was a knife scar on his forehead. It was like a centipede was staying there. Meanwhile, the woman was only in her 20s and played with a small knife. When Yimo came in, she seemed to be still paying attention to her knife and didn't notice at all that a person had come in. The knife scar man saw Yimo come in but didn't say anything. He examined Yimo and then said, "You're very cocky. You dare to kill my men now? Do you know what the scariest thing in the world is? Young man, do you think it's death? I know you're not afraid of death, but I have 100 ways for you to crave death. Yimo sneered. Congratulations, you are right. Thus, I need you to send a message to Chen Longtu. Tell him to wash his neck clean. Chen-ph. You got balls, but I hope you still do later. You will regret it. Hearing Yimo's words, Lang Ji was extremely furious. Up until he entered this career, there had not been a young man who dared to be so cocky to him. But before he could stand up, Yimo walked up and coldly said, "Piss off." Even with Lang Ji wanting to see Yimo beg for mercy, he couldn't endure Yimo's arrogance. Yimo wanted to sit in his seat, so he didn't hesitate to raise his fists and punch towards Yimo. The fist broke through the air, making sounds that even people on the sides could distinctly hear. They couldn't help but to gasp at Lang Ji's power. This was a rare phenomena. 1. First Lang is a homonym, second Lang means wolf. Chapter 115, Intimidation. Chapter 115, Intimidation. Lang Ji was very pleased with this punch. No one had dared to take a punch directly from him because if they did, he wouldn't need to attack a second time. However, what made Lang Ji feel more satisfaction was that Yimo actually grabbed towards his fist. "You're asking to die." Lang Ji sneered. He already heard his men's reports and knew Yimo's cockiness and also knew of his power. However, this person dared to catch his fist. This was no different to suicide. This guy was indeed cocky, but he didn't want to kill Yimo immediately. He wanted to torture this young man. However, the truth didn't unfold as he wished. Yimo's hand looked very slow, but it just managed to grab his fist. And, Yimo's hands seemed to suddenly grow bigger. There was a fit of cracking sound and Lang Ji looked at his fists in disbelief. Forgetting the pain, he realized the sound actually came from his fists. He clearly saw that Yimo's palm was more than 10 centimeters away from his fist, but it was still crushed. Oh, not crushed. Rather, it was crunched into a soft flab. Ah! Bone-screeching pain passed up and Lang Ji could no longer resist but to yell. Yimo raised his leg and kicked Lang Ji flying out. Meanwhile, he walked up to the chair and sat down. "Kill him." Before Lang Ji finished his words, multiple men were ready to shoot at Yimo. Yimo's movement was simple. He flung out tens of nails, and all those who prepared to charge or open fire were either shot in the forehead or in the throat. In the blink of an eye, there were only 3 people left in the room dumbfounded, other than the woman and Lang Ji. 9 people were killed in a few breaths. Despite being in excruciating pain, Lang Ji was still dazed. The pain on his hands was no longer important. What was important was that the man in front was too terrifying. The strongest person he had seen was that Xian Taoist, the second in command of the Metal River Gang. But if he were to be compared with Yimo, he seemed a little bit off. It was said that Xian Taoist's martial arts was at a very high stage. It was said that he was almost reaching black level, but even with a Taoist like that, he still felt Yimo was stronger. Moreover, he was also a martial artist who was about to reach middle stage of yellow level. This was only because he found a poverty-stricken ancient martial artist as a teacher when he was young. With his continued hard work, he finally attained his status today. However, he would have never expected that he wouldn't even be able to receive a single move from this young man. More importantly, Yimo's speed was too horrifying. It seemed that even guns were useless against him. That young girl seemed to have just discovered Yimo. She no longer had the spirit to play with the knife in her hands. Instead, she gazed at the ground full of corpses, and then at Lang Ji. Then without any sign, she flung her hand and the knife had become a white ray of light that shot towards Yimo's neck. Her knife had killed people stronger than Lang Ji because they wouldn't have the time to dodge. Yimo suddenly raised his hand and another metal nail flung out. The metal nail clunked against the blade. The blade fell to the ground but the metal nail didn't stop and continued shooting towards the woman's wrist. Before the woman had reacted, the metal nail passed through her wrist. After a few drops of blood, the girl's face was pale as a heart-wrenching pain passed on. She knew that this wasn't the most important, but instead that her hand was now disabled. The flying knife she was renowned for wouldn't fly anymore. "You destroyed my hand. You." The girl was suddenly angry, Perhaps it would be better for her to accept death than the disabling of her hand. At least after death, she wouldn't be able to think. But without her hand, she would rather die than live. Oh, I can't destroy it. Then I'll chop it off. Yimo raised his hand again. No one saw what he flung out, but those few who didn't die had a spooky feeling. The woman couldn't react at all and just felt her arm cool. Then, she saw a shocking event. Her hand, along with her forearm, fell on the ground. She was dazed. However, Lang Ji reacted and quickly used his healthy hand to seal the blood vessel on this girl's arm. But even so, he couldn't stop the blood from flowing out. At this moment, Lang Ji turned around and looked at Yimo in fear. He didn't even see what Yimo used to cut her hand. This man was too out of this world. The chairman must not have thought that the person he was trying to catch was someone like this. For those who tried to kill him, Yimo was merciless. This woman was ruthless and wanted his life as soon as she attacked. This woman finally understood that her hand and arm was sliced off. She looked at Yimo in fear, no longer having her previous rage. She knew that this person could kill her like a chicken. "Do you know why I didn't kill you?" Yimo looked at that woman and said. Seeing that woman no longer dared to say anything, he continued, "It's because you seem to have something you rely on. I'll let you live. Go back and get whatever you rely on. I'll finish it once and for all. Oh, I'm called Yimo, don't forget." And Yimo turned to Lang Ji and said, "Do you know why I also didn't kill you?" Lang Ji subconsciously shook his head. He was dumbfounded by Yimo's terrifying power. Yimo smiled. "Because I need you to send a message to Qian Longtu. Tell him, he shouldn't have hunted me. I will go visit him. Oh, and I killed his son." Yimo then looked at the remaining 3 men and said, "Do you know why I didn't kill you guys?" This time, he didn't wait for them to reply and said once again, "Because I need you to clean up the corpses on the ground. There are 9, so pile them up now, I don't like wasting time." Then, Yimo no longer spoke. The remaining 3 acted very fast. They quickly piled the bodies together. Yimo stood up and suddenly formed countless hand signs with his fingers. Breaths of scorching fire descended on the corpses. He was actually shooting out fireballs. Now that Yimo was stage 3 Kai gathering, his fireballs could easily destroy the corpses. He destroyed these corpses for 2 reasons. One was to destroy the evidence, and the other to give Lang Ji a warning. But after shooting out 10 fireballs at once, even Yimo was a bit tired. Afterwards, he looked at the dazed people and coldly said, "Go back and tell Qian Longtu, after I'm done with my errands, I will go visit him." Then he used her invisibility magic and disappeared. Seeing Yimo just blow fireballs and destroy the corpses, Lang Ji and the others already turned into stone. But now, he even disappeared into thin air. The 3 men who had been pulling bodies finally couldn't handle it and fainted. They could kill people and hack people, but those were ordinary people. The occurrence before them was already extraordinary. Although Lang Ji was stronger than them, even he couldn't handle the situation. Even Xian Taoist wouldn't be able to fire fireballs and suddenly disappear. The chairman actually got into conflict with such a person. Was he even a person? That woman like Lang Ji was scared speechless by Yimo's powers. If someone like him really went to visit his boss wouldn't be able to survive even if he had 1,000 lives. After a long time, Lang Ji finally reacted and yelled, "Quick! Stop all pursuit on Yimo and Shi Ying. These 2 are the same. Take the recording today, I'm going back immediately." Lang Ji shouted non-stop until all the men outside came in. When he was fully awake, he made haste to return and no longer dared for his men to hunt Yimo because they weren't even enough for exercise. He even suspected if his boss's army was enough to subdue Yimo. Of course, Yimo intentionally did that to let Qian Longtu know not to hunt him anymore, even if it didn't concern him. Yimo was fearless. He believed that there was people stronger than him, but there wouldn't be much. Furthermore, even if there was, they wouldn't be able to kill him. But at this moment, the Yi family in Beijing was gloomy. It was because the family's company in Europe and America suffered heavy damage. Not only did the new cooperation partners leave, even the old partners started to leave and distance themselves. Although the Yi family's enterprise was managed by the second-in-power He Liangfu, the ones who really benefited was the Yi family. He Liangfu was the only one in the second generation to follow his mother's surname. Now that many business were stumped, he was the most affected. If a large family was no longer supported by business income, then this family would be set to go downhill. If their business was only partially damaged overseas, then their business in Africa and Hong Kong was unbearable to see. Their personnels frequently disappeared in Africa, and their largest clothes factory was forced to shut down. Comparatively, their situation in China was better. The difference between the Yi family meeting and the Song family meeting was that the master was still the old man Yi Beirong. The Yi family situation was obviously worse than the Song family's situation. Last time, the Song family only had a third-generation useless kid die with the latter's Song Xiaotan. It was only a youth with a little ambition. But this time, the Yi family had their finances choked by other people. Although this wouldn't beat the Yi family down, in fact, even if all of their businesses abroad bankrupted, the Yi family still wouldn't die down. However, taking damage in their finances meant negative influence elsewhere. Are you sure it's done by Qian Longtu? Yi Beirong frowned. He knew that as soon as he left the center, he decided to put the family more into business than politics since there weren't exceptional offsprings in the younger generations. But before he could do so, they were dealt such a heavy blow. Chapter 116, Tactics. Chapter 116, Tactics. Yes, it has now been confirmed that whether it's Europe or not, all our business have been targeted. In Africa, there has been multiple accounts of personnel disappearance. Those who disappeared are all those in the management level. The one speaking was a man in his 50s near Yi Beirong. He was Yi Long, the son of Yi Beirong's big brother. His position was similar to Song Hai in the Song family. Do you know why? We never had any conflict. Is he not afraid that we will sweep his Nanqing in mainland? He dares to challenge our Yi family. Yi Beirong had been in the high command for a long time. Although he was about to come down, his tone was indisputable. He indeed had such capability. No matter how strong Qian Longtu was, he couldn't come to the surface. If he pissed off the Yi family, although they couldn't completely eradicate Qian Longtu, it would be easy for them to exterminate all his forces in mainland. Even if Qian Longtu had his own army, did he dare to bring it to the border? If he did, then it would all be gone with a few cannon sounds. What craze was Qian Longtu on daring to touch the Yi family? Yi Long immediately said, I had investigated, it might be because of Yi Mo killed Qian Longtu's only son and pissed off Qian Longtu. Qian Longtu probably wants to exhume his anger on us. Yi Mo had been kicked out of the Yi family, everyone knows this. Since this Qian Longtu dares to do such things, we don't need to be afraid of him. The man speaking was a rather bleak middle-aged man. He was called Yi Huang, Yi Wenqi's elder son. Although his voice wasn't loud, everyone in the meeting room could hear him clearly. Yi Wenqi was in his 50s, barely had any hair on his head, but had thick eyebrows. However, his eyes were sleek and long. Hearing Yi Huang's words, he immediately reproached, don't talk nonsense. Yi Beirong frowned, and after a while, he asked, I remember last time, someone said he was going to investigate Yi Mo's matter. What was that about? Father, it was me. I heard last time that Yi Mo had done quite a lot of things, even Shi Ying from Ninghai was him, so I couldn't resist but to go investigate him. From the recording I took back, Shi Ying did look like Yi Mo, but I hadn't been able to say this due to other things, Yi Wenjin immediately said. Yi Beirong's eyebrows frowned harder. After a long while, he asked, where did you know that Shi Ying was Yi Mo? The Song family. Yi Wenjin wasn't an idiot. He realized something was wrong amidst his sentence. He got his news from the Song family, but the Song family was always on bad terms with the Yi family. How could they be nice enough to pass him this message? Yi Beirong sighed. His son was still too immature. He didn't even see through such obvious actions from the Song family. If it was Yi Wenqi or his big brother's son, they would perhaps ask more clearly. However, he knew that even if the Yi family didn't investigate Yi Mo, the Song family would try to make Qian Longtu think that the Yi family took Yi Mo back in. They fell into the Song family's tricks. The Song family could actually let go of Song Shaowen's killer and plan big time for the future by pulling the Yi family down. Now that Qian Longtu had targeted the Yi family wouldn't let Qian Longtu go even if they knew the causes. If the two sides fought, the Song family would definitely help Qian Longtu. In this case, it would be very hard for the Yi family to eradicate the Nanqing in China, or perhaps even impossible. Yi Beirong can imagine that if this tug-of-war continued, the Yi family would plummet. But even if he knew, the Yi family still had to make a move because the next target for Qian Longtu would be their business in mainland. Plus, if the Yi family was attacked like this and didn't retaliate, then those businessmen who cooperated with the Yi family would all leave them, and their situation would be worse. This was a powerful move by the Song family. Now, even if the Yi family realized it, the Song family wouldn't worry the Yi family not falling for it. He didn't know how much benefits the Song family gave to Qian Longtu to make him willing to be used. Even if Yi Beirong wanted truce with the Song family, they would probably decline because that things have unfolded till now. If the Yi family fell, the Song family would acquire something much bigger than a truce. Yi Mo bought a cheap set of clothes and used the rest of the money to buy a plane ticket. He didn't even have enough to buy a bag, however. Yi Mo returned to his identity when Dong made for him. As for the name Mo Yi, he wouldn't need it anymore. He believed that before he went to find Qian Longtu wouldn't do something such as hunting him down. Although Yi Mo dressed clean, only he had the cheapest clothes on the entire plane. However, he didn't mind this at all. Just when Yi Mo was prepared to find a seat, he noticed that the jade bracelet the old man behind him actually had spirit kai. Yi Mo scanned with his spirit sense. He saw that he was situated just in front of the old man and the man had two women beside him. The woman sitting next to the window had a big mouth cover looking very fashionable. The other one was a middle-aged woman. Yi Mo wanted to ask the old man where he got his bracelet from, hence he wanted to sit next to the old man. As such, he could only swap with the middle-aged woman. "Excuse me, can I swap a seat with you?" Yi Mo looked at the woman and asked. The rule is not to swap seats. Before the woman could reply, the flight attendant had already spoke. The woman looked apologetically at Yi Mo. She knew what Yi Mo wanted and wanted to help him, but she wasn't allowed. In her opinion, the young man wanted to hit up the fashionable girl next to the window. The old man also showed an understanding smile. Obviously, he thought the same as the middle-aged woman. Of course Yi Mo didn't know what they were thinking. He was disappointed and thought he could only wait until he got off the plane before he could talk to the old man. The fashionable girl heard Yi Mo's words and scanned him. Her eyes were full of derision. Even the middle-aged woman could see. She sighed. Yi Mo's courage was good, but he was just too shabby looking. She wondered how he got this plane ticket. Since he couldn't swap, Yi Mo didn't force it. He would wait till he got off the plane to talk to the old man. Yi Mo no longer talked and closed his eyes to meditate. 2 hours later, the plane arrived at Luokang Airport. Yi Mo got off the plane first but stood outside waiting. When the fashionable girl saw Yi Mo waiting outside, she felt more disgusted. This time, she intentionally wore a mask outside but was still ineffective against such people. She intentionally walked around because she really didn't want to talk even one sentence with someone like Yi Mo. The woman obviously knew the old man. Seeing Yi Mo wait outside, they smiled on the inside thinking this young man was really persistent. However, that fashionable lady obviously wasn't interested at all. She was even disgusted, but he could still put down his dignity to wait here. However, in order to fulfill Yi Mo's wishes, the two intentionally took the other route as well, wanting Yi Mo to wait for the fashionable lady alone. Seeing the old man not walk his way, Yi Mo quickly followed. Seeing Yi Mo follow, that fashionable woman stood still disgusted and glared at Yi Mo saying coldly, "Do you want to invite me for dinner?" Yi Mo was confused by this sentence and frowned. "I don't know you, why would I invite you to dinner? I don't have money with me now, so if you want to be invited to dinner, ask someone else." Then, Yi Mo didn't waste any time with this woman and walked in front of the old man and asked politely, "Older brother, hello, I'm Yi Mo, sorry to disturb you, but I want to ask you a question." This was the first time the old man was called a older brother and looked curiously at Yi Mo before saying, "Hello, Young man, ask me. If I know, I will definitely tell you. Emo pointed at the bracelet and asked, May I ask where you bought this from? I feel this bracelet is very special. Can I have a look? Hearing Emo's words, the old man took the bracelet off and gave it to Emo without hesitation. However, that middle-aged woman was alert. A strange man asked to look at the old man's bracelet the first time they met, and this young man looked poor. However, the old man had passed the bracelet, so she didn't say anything. Emo took the bracelet and felt it carefully. There was indeed some faint spirit Kai. After a while, he gave it back to the old man. Your bracelet is very unique, much better than ordinary jade items. If I'm not wrong, this should be a magic artifact that can make people healthy. Oh, young man, you also know magic artifact. The old man was immediately interested. He usually liked to walk around the market for ancient artifacts and was taught by many of those in the profession. A magic artifact was a thing that was blessed by someone powerful. However, their functions varied. His bracelet was indeed a magic artifact and was one of high level. However, this was given to him by a friend. This young man could tell his bracelet was a magic artifact, and this made the old man interested. Since the young people nowadays rarely believed such things, you're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.